Wakana Gojo is an awkward boy who has a peculiar interest in making dolls, and the last thing he ever wanted was anyone finding out about this weird hobby. But things take an awkward turn when Marin Kitagawa takes interest in him. She is popular and pretty, but Wakana discovers that she is actually secretly a cosplayer, and she needs his help making her cosplays.
I beg you, please help me make the perfect cosplay!
Today we're breaking down my Dress Up Darling, so sit back and enjoy this cute romance story. As a little brat, Wakana has always been fascinated watching his grandfather, Kaoru, craft stunning Hina dolls. Noticing that his grandson has taken an interest in the doll, the old pops tells Wakana that he can reach his level only if he puts in daily practice. This loads young Wakana up with a truckload of motivation, and he dives straight into doll making. However, a few days in, his friend Nobara catches him mid-craft and asks whether he likes to bend over for guys. Huh? Devastated that her childhood crush isn't a Sigma, Nobara tells Wakana that she wants nothing to do with a doll playing loser and bounces. The alarm clock screams, and Wakana jolts awake from that traumatic trip down memory lane. With dread pumping through his bloodstream, Wakana glances at the Hina doll and tells her she looks as stunning as always. After a long session of jizzing to his doll, he then goes to greet his Gramps, who fills him in on a wild 1 versus 5 brawl he had with his collection of Hina dolls. While bonding over their mutual doll obsession, Wakana lets his Gramps know that he's already deep into a new batch of dolls. During breakfast, Kaoru points out how Wakana's dolls have mid-tier faces but absolutely fire outfits. Sighing heavily, Wakana admits he still hasn't cracked the code on getting the faces right, so Kaoru reassures him that it'll click eventually, then pivots to asking whether Wakana is the Riz King of his school. This question sends Wakana into a coughing fit as he internally identifies himself as more of a gooning king. Thrown off by why his Gramps would even bring up the topic of friends, Wakana asks him where that question came from. So Kaoru responds by pointing out that since childhood, Wakana spent all his time fondling dolls, which naturally left zero room for a social life. Laughing awkwardly, Wakana insists to his grandfather that he does in fact have real homies.
Stop the cap.
Later that morning at school, Wakana drops into his seat and is immediately swamped by guilt as he mentally apologizes to his grandfather, admitting he couldn't lock down any friendships in school either. Just then, Wakana glances up to find a girl airborne and descending her soft cheeks directly onto his desk. Shrieking in pain, the girlie, Marin, apologizes to Wakana for crash landing on his workspace. However, the instant Wakana clocks Marin and her choker that screams she enjoys rough play, he begins glitching out, which has Marin concerned about his psychological state. Out of nowhere, Marin spots a paint smear on Wakana's arm and asks about it, sending him into full panic mode. Spooked by his weird reaction, Marin peels away from Wakana and rejoins her friend group. Watching Marin from across the room, Wakana registers just how far apart their worlds are. While he is a lonely creep who is fascinated with dolls, Marin is bubbly and maintains actual relationships with breathing humans. Meanwhile, Nawa fills the rest of the group in on how, during a salon trip with Marin, some rizless idiot had been waiting around for her. However, since the guy had the conversational range of a Reddit post, he tried to shoot his shot by roasting Marin instead. After catching the biggest ick of her life,
Brother,
Marin shut him down completely and stepped outside. Upon hearing this, Marin's friends scold her for always icing out potential suitors, but Marin claps back at her circle by reminding them that she is that girl who refuses to tolerate male nonsense. As Wakana eavesdrops on Marin's declaration, he silently wishes he could operate with a Sigma mindset like that. Later in the day, Wakana agrees to take the cleaning duties that his classmates dump on him. Once they clear out, he concludes that being a human doormat is just less exhausting than growing a spine. Out of nowhere, Marin strolls in and starts tidying the classroom, leaving Wakana completely blindsided. When he questions what she's doing, Marin reveals that she is also assigned to cleaning duty. Baffled by her presence, Wakana asks if she actually came to help, and as Marin spells out that it is literally her responsibility, Wakana admits that he isn't exactly used to people pulling their weight. Hearing that, Marin gets heated and demands to know whether Wakana has ever confronted those freeloaders directly, to which Wakana responds that people just tend to view him as dependable. Based on that answer, Marin asks if he is Princess, because he is visibly operating without any spine. After heading home, Wakana stews over how Marin had a point until his sewing machine decides to die on him mid-frustration. Refusing to let that stop him from cooking up some heat for his doll, Wakana heads to the home economics room to use the sewing machine. While he's deep in the zone whispering freaky things to the inanimate doll, Marin waltzes in and catches Wakana completely slipping. Right as he's about to fully combust, Marin enthusiastically tells Wakana that being able to sew makes him low-key cool. Past the initial shock, Wakana explains that his family runs a Hina doll-making operation and that he personally enjoys designing outfits for those dolls. The second Marin processes this, she starts peeling off her plot cover, leading the degenerate to assume he's finally about to smash something besides a doll. Sadly, Marin shatters that delusion by throwing on a hideous costume and revealing that she is attempting to recreate a specific character. Taking one look at the outfit, Wakana tells Marin that language fails him but math doesn't, and promptly slaps a -1 out of 10 on her work. After absolutely demolishing Marin's sewing abilities with his critique, Wakana notices tears beginning to pool in her eyes and immediately scrambles to apologize. To his shock, Marin says his brutal feedback was exactly what she needed, and then drops the bombshell that she is a cosplayer who wants him to be her personal fashion designer. Watching Marin practically grovel, Wakana flashes back to all the small kindnesses she'd shown him and agrees to take on the job. Overjoyed by the news, Marin breaks into a little dance as she gushes to Wakana about how pumped she is to finally cosplay her favorite character. After listening to Marin ramble about her favorite character, Shizuku, Wakana concludes that all hot girls are completely cooked from the inside out. As Wakana sits through Marin gushing about her favorite game and its themes that would only resonate with 50-year-old basement dwellers, he starts genuinely worrying about the craziness going on in her household. Initially, Wakana tries to reassure himself that no one could be as degenerate as him, but one look at Marin's eyes tells him she is absolutely buried in this character. He then questions why she's playing adult games, and she casually confesses that she once stumbled on those sketchy ads that pop up on spicy websites and got immediately addicted to those nut in seconds games. After expressing how pumped he is to be working alongside Marin, Wakana mentions that the obvious first step is heading out to shop for materials. Marin thanks him for agreeing to help, and the two call it a day and go their separate ways. Later that night, Wakana thinks about Marin's freaky taste and figures she probably grew up without a male role model. Strangely enough, this thought cheers him right up as he begins fantasizing about stepping into that daddy role, sliding into her mother's DMs. The next morning, Wakana swings open his front door and is met with a beaming Marin standing right there. Caught completely off guard by her showing up, Wakana asks in genuine confusion how she even tracked down where he lives. Marin responds by informing Wakana that the internet actually has uses beyond gooning Shakira's waist movement. With that settled, Marin strolls directly into Wakana's room and immediately roasts him for having the most basic and soulless bedroom setup she has ever seen. She then starts poking around, clearly hunting for something questionable, when her gaze suddenly locks onto the paintbrushes he uses for crafting his dolls. Meanwhile, from Wakana's perspective, all his brain can register is Marin's fat cheek pointing directly at him. Confronted with his sight, Wakana desperately wishes Marin would sit on his face, but to get his biological bazookas under control, he immediately demands to know what she is actually doing in his room. Without a single moment of hesitation, Marin pops open her shirt buttons and presents her magnificently massive honkers to the room. She then cheerfully explains that wearing a bikini was her genius solution so he could take her measurements without any hassle. Meanwhile, poor Wakana's entire mental infrastructure begins to collapse at the sight of a woman's actual body. Noticing the boy is essentially malfunctioning, Marin tells him she will shut her eyes so he can do his job without completely short-circuiting. As Wakana approaches with the measuring tape, he focuses intensely on not making direct hand contact with Marin so he doesn't burst a fat one. So while thinking of his grandma's saggy milk pouch, he managed to power through the whole measurement process. After a painful ordeal, Wakana curses himself for being the kind of guy who loses it over minor things, while Marin acts like none of this is a big deal. However, what he doesn't know is that Marin is internally screaming just as hard as he is. Once the measurements are finally done, Wakana arrives at the personal conclusion that being caught in a war zone is preferable to sharing a room with a baddie this attractive. He then asks Marin to hand over some reference images of her favorite character so he can actually get started on building the costume. Within seconds, Marin produces a stack of magazines plastered with Shizuka and casually mentions that she turns into a one-woman hype machine whenever she flips through them. Putting two and two together, Wakana immediately starts flushing red. Later that night, Gramps trudges back from the store and cracks open the door to let Wakana know he picked up a brand new sewing machine, only to find his grandson locked into the computer. Assuming Wakana has finally graduated to watching real women do nasty stuffs online, Kaoru quietly pulls the door shut, but then stops, and genuinely wonders why on earth the dude is taking notes while streaming a naughty anime. The next day, Marin flaunts the outfit made by Wakana and tells him that when she cosplays, she fully dives into the role and starts acting like the character. Before Wakana can even react, Marin lifts her skirt and calls him master. Suddenly, the alarm blares, yanking the poor freak out of his wet dream. As Wakana realizes he has soiled the sheets with his manjuice, he apologizes to his doll for being unfaithful to her. After handling his business, Wakana makes his way to school, with his mind still swimming in filthy thoughts. Wrecked with guilt, Wakana wonders how he'll look Marin in the eye when he spots the hallway parting like the Red Sea for Marin and her crew. The bystanders shower Marin with praise, calling her a goddess, which makes Wakana genuinely question how a girl like Marin ever spared him a glance. Out of nowhere, Marin clocks a hideous mug in the crowd and recognizes it as Wakana. As she dashes over to greet him, Wakana suddenly finds himself swallowed up by Marin's whole squad. Having never been this close to so many hotties at once, Wakana's brain promptly fries itself. As Marin and her girls take off, Wakana catches people whispering that he's some kind of creep for hovering around elite baddies. This rattles him so badly that he spends the entire day dodging Marin like a final exam. After finally tracking him down, Marin invites Wakana to come shopping with her. But right as he's about to agree, Wakana clocks all the eyes, staring him down, and ends up shutting Marin out. As he retreats to a safe distance, Wakana sighs and murmurs an apology to Marin when the girl materializes behind him like some creepy ghost. Having caught Wakana's apology, Marin tells him that if he actually feels bad, then he needs to stop running from her. Eventually, Wakana confesses to Marin that people are talking trash about them, to which Marin casually fires back that she has zero issue being spotted with him since she considers him a genuine friend. With that settled, she yanks Wakana along to go shopping. Once they arrive at a cosplay shop, Wakana is struck by just how many hopeless otakus exist in this world. He then pulls out a reference sheet, laying out every item needed for Shizuku's cosplay. This blows Marin away, and she openly praises Wakana's commitment to wanting to crack her honeypot. As the shopping trip rolls on, Wakana confidently flexes his expertise in picking out the right fabric for the costume. Once they've grabbed everything on the list, Marin drags Wakana over to a wig shop where his willy starts throbbing at the sight of all those silky wigs. Marin tells Wakana she's brought him here to hunt down a wig that matches Shizuku's hair, then moves to grab one when Wakana cuts her off and points out that she's going for the wrong color. Getting schooled by someone who isn't even a fan, Marin turns beet red but admits to Wakana that she's really glad to have him by her side. This puts a genuine smile on Wakana's face as it dawns on him that for once in his miserable life, he's actually useful to someone. To show Wakana her gratitude, Marin drags the sheltered virgin into a lingerie store and gives him enough material to goon with later. After eating, the two prepare to head home when Marin asks Wakana whether he's started watching her favorite show. Wakana confirms he has, but admits it'll take him a while to finish since the content is a little too hot for his fragile system. As the conversation flows, Marin brings up her favorite cosplayer, a girl named Juju. She fills Wakana in on how this girl channels every ounce of her daddy-issue energy into her cosplays, turning her photos into instant goon content for lonely dudes all over the world. Upon checking out Juju's pictures, Wakana notes that she looks young enough to still be getting excited over meal toys. After listening to Marin geek out over her passions, Wakana opens up about the very first moment he ever laid eyes on Hina dolls. For him, those dolls became his entire standard of beauty. After taking in Wakana's story, Marin tells him how lucky she feels to have crossed paths with someone like him. This sends Wakana into a full-blown blushing meltdown, and to bury his embarrassment, he pivots and asks Marin when exactly the cosplay event is happening. As Marin fills him in on the date, Wakana's expression tightens with anxiety. Riding the train home, Wakana reflects on how long it takes him to finish Hina doll outfits, so crafting a full adult woman's costume in 2 weeks is obviously going to wreck his schedule. And because he absolutely refuses to miss his chance at fondling Marin's honkers, Wakana gets increasingly stressed about pulling the costume off in time. When he gets back home, Wakana is met by Kaoru, who immediately wants to know where he's been. Wakana explains he was out running errands with a friend, which prompts Kaoru to start rifling through his bags until he pulls out a pair of lacy panties. This makes Kaoru arrives at the devastating realization that he raised a bottom and his family tree ends here, so he accidentally tumbles down the staircase. After rushing Kaoru to the hospital, Wakana sits outside the emergency room when his cousin Miori shows up out of nowhere. Once the doctor gives Kaoru the all clear, Miori insists he recover at her place for a bit. A few days later, Wakana heads back to school and breaks the news to Marin about his grandfather's accident. Wanting to be there for a visibly bummed Wakana, Marin shows up with sandwiches and a wet kitty on standby just in case. Caught off guard at first, Wakana tells Marin he'd rather pray for strength during this particular moment. Marin takes the hint and suggests they swap numbers so she can be around to boost his mood whenever he needs it. As Wakana shuffles back to class, his brain is already spinning out about Marin's dress that he hasn't even touched yet. The situation nosedives further when Marin casually drops that midterms are right around the corner. And just to pile on, when he gets home, some girl calls asking for a walkthrough of the Hina doll workshop. Despite his already exploding plate, Wakana reluctantly agrees to have her come by the following day. After he hands up, Wakana fully spirals as the sheer weight of everything crashes down on him. But come morning, he locks in and throws himself headfirst into studying. He breaks up the grind with visits to his grandfather over at his uncle's place. Then, once he's back home, he finally cracks open the project and starts attacking Marin's dress, dead set on bulldozing through every obstacle. When exams finally wrap up, a completely fried Wakana bolts from the classroom before Marin can even open her mouth. Since she couldn't get a word in during school hours, Marin rolls up to Wakana's house with a beef bowl in hand, only to find the lights off. Figuring he's probably out visiting his grandfather, Marin turns around and heads home, looking absolutely gutted about her cancelled appointment. What she doesn't know is that Wakana is upstairs in his room, completely falling apart over how her stupid dress has robbed him of both sleep and appetite. Out of nowhere, Wakana's gaze lands on his brushes, which pulls up a buried memory of his grandfather, talking about grinding away at his craft, even while being an undisputed GOAT in the game. Back then, Kaoru had told a young Wakana that the grind never stops, not even for legends. Dredging up that old conversation makes Wakana spiral even deeper into self-pity, as he questions whether he still hasn't finished Marin's dress simply because he sucks at his own craft. After bawling like a complete failure, Wakana finds his footing again the moment Marin crosses his mind. Next day, Marin rolls up to Wakana's place and is absolutely floored to see the dress sitting there, completely done. Stunned by how fast he pulled it off, she tells him he really didn't have to overwork himself over it, since she wasn't even entering the upcoming cosplay event. That lands on Wakana like a freight train, and he crumbles to the floor in sheer relief, confessing he was running himself into the ground for a deadline that was never even real. Watching him fall apart makes it finally click for Marin just how brutally she'd stressed him out, and that realization sends her straight into tears. Sobbing through it, Marin tells Wakana how genuinely awful she feels for draining the life out of him and not his creamy sack juice. While Marin is still crying and beating herself up for being selfish, Wakana tries to redirect the whole energy by nudging her to try on the finished costume. Marin jumps at the chance to shift gears and happily lets Wakana take over styling her hair. With the hair sorted, the two fall into a back and forth about what makeup would best transform Marin into Shizuku. They keep vibing and collaborating, with Wakana dishing out tips and hype, slowly but surely melting away all the tension that had been suffocating the room. While they're deep in conversation about the latest Hina doll scene, Wakana opens up about his dream of making it big as a doll maker. Marin fires back with nothing but pure hype, telling him flat out that she has zero doubt he'd be an insane doll maker. Her words pull a real smile out of Wakana, which short-circuits Marin's brain for a solid second. Once the moment settles, Wakana sends Marin off to get changed into the costume. She slips into it, and Wakana grins ear to ear as he tells Marin she looks exactly like Shizuku brought to life. With a massive grin, Marin tells Wakana that he could be the next fashion icon if he continues sharpening his craft. Feeling satisfied, Wakana then asks Marin whether the dress sits comfortably on her body, and Marin replies that while mobility is a struggle, she absolutely adores how the outfit has turned her into a 10/10 trap queen. To further show her appreciation for Wakana's work, Marin starts twerking her fun bags, causing Wakana's battleship to crash inside his pants. With all the hype going straight to her brain, Marin excitedly asks Wakana to snap some photos of her. As she strikes her poses, Wakana points out that she needs to embody Shizuku, since she is technically cosplaying the character. After several botched attempts, Marin takes a deep breath and channels Shizuku's whole energy. Upon watching Marin lock into the character, Wakana fires off multiple shots, which Marin later uploads onto her brand new cosplay account. Noticing how the costume and makeup came out flawless, Marin invites Wakana to come with her to the cosplay event the next day. On the morning of the event, Marin and Wakana pull up to the venue and are greeted by a crowd of creepy nerds pretending to be fictional characters. While Marin absolutely loses her mind seeing everyone in costume, Wakana, on the flip side, gets a digestive episode after clocking so many women in one place. When Marin asks what's got him looking so glum, Wakana admits that his fear of girls runs so deep he came out sobbing from the womb. Marin sympathizes with Wakana's phobia and escorts him somewhere with fewer people. However, the moment they arrive, a walking calorie surplus approaches Marin, requesting a photo, which sends the girl into full fanatic mode. From a distance, Wakana smiles watching Marin enjoy her very first taste of celebrity treatment. He then scans the area and spots men dressed like twinks and women serving full butch energy, and all of it leads Wakana to conclude that bullying is genuinely a net positive for civilization. His mind then drifts back to Marin, and Wakana catches himself thinking about how the two of them won't be spending time together now that her dress is finished. The realization stings Wakana, since he is painfully conscious of the fact that hot girls like her do not voluntarily hang around ugly losers like him. And so, as a tribute to his time with Marin, Wakana mentally revisits her legendary bazongas. Out of nowhere, Wakana spots Marin sprinting toward him in full slow-motion glory. As he keeps watching her approach, Wakana daydreams about a future with Marin as his baby mama, until the girl opens her mouth and announces she is about to detonate. After grieving his shattered fantasy, Wakana snaps back and realizes the costume is roasting Marin alive, and if they don't locate somewhere cool fast, she is going to pass out. As the pair step inside, Marin asks Wakana to wipe down her sweaty back. Despite being shy, Wakana tries dodging his intrusive thoughts from taking over by mentally focusing on your smelly boxers. Unfortunately, every last effort crumbles the moment Marin starts producing sounds identical to your girlfriend when she watches Drake music videos. Feeling some type of way, Wakana begs Marin to cut out those noises before he commits an act that will get him locked up forever. Marin tries to convince Wakana that she is not intentionally messing with him, but when he still can't seem to chill, she decides to head back outside to grab a few more photos. After the cosplay event wraps up, the two board the train where Wakana slumps his shoulders in defeat, knowing their time together has officially expired. To his shock, Marin looks over and asks which cosplay the two of them should go after next. In that instant, Wakana realizes there's still a fighting chance for him, so he cheerfully tells Marin he is planning to grab a mannequin torso to craft even better outfits. As the fatigue starts catching up to him, a drowsy Wakana murmurs to Marin that she looked genuinely stunning in her Shizuka cosplay. This catches Marin off guard, as she remembers that the word beautiful carries serious weight for Wakana and is not something he throws around lightly. The next day, as Marin and Wakana huddle up to rinse out the wig, Marin catches herself, staring at Wakana with googly love eyes. Meanwhile, Grandpa Kaoru tells Miori how he tripped after spotting freaky lingerie in Wakana's shopping bags, clowning on the oldie. Miori reassures Kaoru that everybody needs to feel like a luxury call girl every now and then. Too lost in the sauce to keep up with Gen Z, Kaoru decides to bow out of the conversation entirely. After getting dropped off at home, Kaoru swings the door open and catches Wakana standing there holding a dress. Before he could reach for his belt to beat the craze out, Marin luckily rose up right beside Wakana. Just when he exhales with relief that his grandson isn't a transgender, Kaoru spirals, convinced Wakana is deep in some freaky situationship with a blonde girl. Once everyone chills out, Kaoru gets the memo that Wakana is still a perpetual virgin. So he promptly dishes out an apology to Marin for blowing the whole thing out of proportion. As she waves it off and says, "It's all good," Kaoru turns to Wakana to chat about the dress. While the men go back and forth on how to elevate the dress and what needs fixing, Marin watches Wakana and clocks that she has butterflies trapped in her nether regions for the loser. While she's out here wrestling with these brand new feelings, Marin's stomach lets out a full announcement, prompting Kaoru to extend a dinner invite. Once they're all seated at the table, Marin hypes up Wakana's cooking by declaring him a certified multi-threat. Wakana, keeping it humble, explains that growing up both momless and dadless meant he had no choice but to figure out the kitchen. Through the back and forth, Wakana also discovers that Marin is basically in the same parentless boat, since her mom kicked the bucket and her dad is perpetually overseas, grinding. When asked if she also cooks, Marin proudly pulls up a photo of something she cooked, but both Wakana and his pops look deeply unimpressed. After getting the full rundown on her diet, Kaoru tells Marin that her future husband isn't going to be eating cosplay props and synthetic hair for dinner, but then softens up and throws out an open invite for her to pull up every night. With Wakana co-signing the idea, Marin happily locks it in. Later, as Wakana walks Marin to the train station, she quietly lets him know she'll be back tomorrow. They go their separate ways, and on the ride home, Marin replays the moment Wakana told his grandfather that nothing intimate went down between them. The deeper she sits with it, the more Marin is ready to throw caution to the wind and let the shy virgin hit, even if it's one time. The day after, Kaoru discovers a girl outside the front door completely soaked from the rain. Assuming she's one of Wakana's new trap queens, Kaoru lets her in. Shortly after, when Wakana comes home from school, Kaoru drops the news about the visitor, then heads back out. A cold wave of dread washes over Wakana as he starts spiraling over whether this old fool accidentally let a scammer waltz into the house, given that he quite literally has zero other friends. With each cautious step forward, Wakana cracks open the bathroom door to find a pocket-sized girl standing there in absolutely nothing. As they both scream in shock, the girl loses her balance and crashes straight onto her backside, treating Wakana to a 4K view of her creamy chamber of secret. After the whole disaster blows over, the girl introduces herself as Sajuna Inui, a second year at an all-girls school. Learning she's actually older than him, Wakana finds himself puzzled as to why she's built very close to the ground. Sajuna then cuts to the chase and tells Wakana she came specifically to see the clothes. Assuming she's referring to Hina doll outfits, Wakana leads her to the workshop where Sajuna is immediately disturbed by the wall of doll heads. Wakana then sidles up next to her and cheerfully explains that the greatest perk of forming intimate bonds with dolls is that they are physically incapable of screaming for help. Clocking that Wakana is the type of guy who would get banned from a graveyard, Sajuna snatches him by the collar and demands he make her a cosplay costume. When Wakana tries to wriggle out of it, Sajuna threatens to dial the feds on him, and since she's assembled like a rugrat, the police would throw him under the jail without a second thought. Buried under all those threats, Sajuna drops that she goes by Juju, and Wakana's brain suddenly connects the dots that she's Marin's most obsessed over cosplayer. Feeling the tension ease up slightly, Wakana asks Sajuna how she even tracked down his address. She then lays out that after clocking Marin's cosplay post online, she showed up to the event to scope out the fit in person. When she spotted them leaving together, she trailed him all the way home so she could corner him into compliance. Soon, Marin swings by after her shift to have dinner with Wakana and nearly short-circuits finding Sajuna already there. Wakana does the introduction, but Sajuna visibly bristles at the mention of her government name. Unbothered, Marin immediately unleashes a full barrage of questions and compliments at Sajuna. When Sajuna explains that she tracked Marin down because of the cosplay she posted online, Marin completely combusts with joy. After getting thoroughly pestered by Marin, Sajuna formally requests that Wakana cook up a costume based on Shion Nikaido from the anime Flower Princess Blaze. As Marin enthusiastically breaks down the plot for Wakana, Sajuna clocks something about her and realizes Marin isn't the kind of cosplayer who just throws on daddy-issue outfits for the aesthetic. After Marin goes fully unhinged hyping up the anime, Wakana nudges her to just cosplay Shion herself. Marin pumps the brakes but Sejuna jumps in and tells her to stop overthinking and go for it. Even with both of them tag-teaming her, Marin holds her ground, saying she'd do Shion dirty because her body type just doesn't match the costume. Sejuna, suddenly realizing Marin is precisely the type of cosplayer she has the most respect for, feels a wave of guilt over how quickly she wrote her off. After getting a little emotional and throwing out an apology to Marin, Sejuna asks for Wakana's contact, making a point to clarify she's not here to wedge herself into whatever they've got going. Feeling personally attacked, Wakana aggressively insists there is absolutely nothing going on between him and anyone, which sends Marin into a quiet spiral of joy, knowing Wakana is fully and completely maidenless. Switching vibes from the heavy moment, Marin timidly floats the idea to Sejuna of doing a duo cosplay, where she'd be playing Shion's sister. Before she can even get the full sentence out, Sejuna shuts it down with zero hesitation, absolutely obliterating Marin's dreams on the spot. As Wakana walks back in, he finds Marin on her knees, begging Sejuna to do a joint cosplay with her. Sejuna shuts it down immediately, saying she has zero interest in hanging out with weirdos like her. But the moment Sejuna mentions renting out a studio for her cosplay, Marin's eyes light up and she doubles down on her begging to watch Sejuna work. When Sejuna refuses to give in, Marin points out that she could chip in on the rent since studios don't come cheap. Wakana jumps into the conversation at that point, offering to throw in some money too. Caught off guard, Sejuna demands to know why he's even talking, and Wakana explains that he has to be there since Marin can't handle her own makeup and eyelashes. After weighing the pros of letting Marin tag along, Sejuna grudgingly agrees to allow it just this once. Marin immediately erupts into happy squealing, while Wakana tells the girls he's going to start the anime tonight. Thrown off by his dedication, Sejuna wants to know what his deal is, so Wakana explains that he needs to watch it specifically to study the outfits the characters are wearing. Back home, Wakana hands his Hina doll over to Kaoru for a look while filling him in on his upcoming Netflix and chill plans at Marin's place. As Kaoru quietly examines the doll, Wakana internally panics that he's probably gotten bad, but Kaoru surprises him by saying he's actually improved. Kaoru also knows that Marin has been good for him, drawing a parallel between doing makeup and painting faces on dolls. Riding that confidence boost, Wakana heads over to Marin's place. When she swings the door open, Wakana is greeted first by her massive Dragon Balls, and then by the rest of her. As per usual, Wakana stares at Marin like a golden retriever watching a tennis ball until Marin panics, shuts the door, and sprints off to put her contacts in. Once she lets him in, Marin shows him her room, which immediately murders every bit of anaconda aura that had been building up in his pants. One look at Marin's room, which screams anime convention vendor hall, and Wakana realizes he had absolutely no business being nervous around a fellow freak. Once the initial shock wears off, Wakana settles in, and the two agree to watch the anime together. Midway through their watch session, Marin suddenly clocks that she's basically on a home date with Wakana, conveniently blanking on the very critical detail that a date requires both people to know it's a date. But trapped inside her love craziness, she keeps getting more flustered by the minute as she steals glances at Wakana, who is completely locked in on the screen. Her naughty fantasies about getting it from the back are then rudely hijacked by her stomach letting out a growl. Marin gets genuinely offended that her own body is out here cock-blocking her. Fortunately, Wakana isn't fazed by her gremlin behavior and casually suggests they grab something to eat. Even though Wakana tells her not to bother cooking, Marin refuses to hear it and marches into the kitchen to throw a meal together. While attempting an omurice, Marin fumbles the omelet fold over the rice and produces something that looks like a culinary cry for help. Ugly as it is, Wakana reassures Marin that the omurice actually tastes really good, and that's enough to put a big smile on her face. They keep watching the anime together until Wakana eventually gets in his feelings about it. Later, Wakana reaches out to Sejuna to get her take on the reference sketch he put together. Sejuna is genuinely impressed by how detailed it is and offers to cover the costume costs. But Wakana turns her down, saying it's too soon for that. He then brings up how he noticed her eye spacing looked different across some of her cosplay shots, which leads Sejuna to explain that she pulls off the effect using cosplay tape, and then goes ahead to walk him through it live over video call. During the call, Wakana casually drops that Marin's costume was literally his first ever, which blows Sejuna's mind. It then hits her that Marin's early photos looked rough because she was shooting on a garbage Android as a complete rookie. That realization leads her to offer up her camera, mentioning that her little sister is into photography. Since Sejuna's cosplay photos always look incredible, Wakana asks if her sister could teach him how to shoot, and Sejuna agrees and tells him to come over. After settling on a family restaurant for the meetup, Marin excitedly announces she's coming too, because she also wants to pick up some photography skills. When they finally meet the Inui sisters in person, Wakana is caught off guard to discover that Sejuna's younger sister Shinju is not only stacked with front meats, but also literally taller than her older sibling. While sharing some of her top photos of Sejuna with Marin, Shinju drops the bombshell that she was the one who set up Sejuna's cosplay account and coined the alias. Caught off guard by this, Wakana asks Shinju what was going through her head, pushing the stacked queen to admit that she just wanted to bring kawaii energy into this painfully bleak world. On top of that, Shinju also let slip that while she ran the account, she had no clue how to reply whenever people gushed over Juju. Sejuna jumps in to clarify that she cosplays purely for herself and has zero interest in engaging with anybody else. Watching the two sisters interact, Wakana and Marin both clock that Shinju is absolutely obsessed with her big sis. After some casual small talk, Shinju whips out her dad's camera and immediately launches into why a proper camera slaps harder than any phone camera. While Shinju runs through a bunch of other camera specs, Marin casually pops the question of whether Shinju ever wants to cosplay herself. The question throws Shinju for a loop, but after a beat, she bashfully confesses to the group that she just wants to be behind the lens capturing Sejuna. Respecting Shinju's choice, Marin asks to borrow the camera so she can mess around with it herself. As she fiddles with it, Marin lets it be known that she's low-key dying to get her own camera someday. That sends Wakana down a rabbit hole of checking prices on the internet. After seeing just how pricey cameras actually are, Wakana concludes that he'd basically have to bag a loaded American sugar mama just to afford one. The following day, the whole crew links up to scout out spots for their upcoming photo shoot. Top of the list is a creepy abandoned hospital that has Sejuna fully shaking in her boots, while Marin and Shinju are hyped to poke around inside. Wakana clocks Sejuna's terrified energy real quick and dashes over to calm her down. When he questions why she's pushing herself like this, Sejuna flips it back on him and asks what dreams he's even chasing. Wakana opens up and shares that his goal is to become a Hina doll craftsman. Taking that in, Sejuna urges Wakana to absolutely chase that dream, then drops that her own dream was always to become a magical girl. She goes on to explain how, as a little brat, she desperately wished, with everything in her, to become a magical girl, but once school rolled around, reality smacked her, and she understood that it was a pipe dream. But then middle school came along, and it clicked. She could just buy outfits and live out that magical girl fantasy herself. So no matter how rough it gets, she's committed to living out her dream of being a magical girl. As the weight of everything sinks in for Wakana, he asks Sejuna what made her pick him, specifically, to craft her costume. So Sejuna admits it wasn't a logical decision. The moment she laid eyes on Marin's cosplay outfit, she was completely gone for it and knew she needed him to create something for her. Right then, Wakana's eyes go wide as he's hit with a flashback to the exact same feeling he had the very first time he ever laid eyes on Hina dolls. Overwhelmed with emotions, Wakana straight up starts crying, which has Sejuna genuinely stressing over his mental state. The next morning at school, Wakana cracks his sore body and lets out a sigh of relief now that exams are finally cooked, but out of nowhere, Marin rolls up and invites him to hit the beach with her. Not long after, the two pull up to the shore, where Wakana gets his very first glimpse of the ocean. Shook by this, Marin can't wrap her head around how he's never once made it out to the beach. Wakana then reveals that he's been so locked in on his craft that he never had the opportunity to visit the beach, or really anywhere else for that matter. That fires Marin up to shoot her shot as she tells Wakana she can drag him to all kinds of new spots over summer break. Wakana gladly takes her up on the offer, and later Marin has a full meltdown over how unhinged bold she just was. The next day, Marin shows up at Wakana's house and immediately yanks her shirt up to flash him her brand new underwear. After completely frying the poor guy's brain, Marin keeps clowning on Wakana until he begs her to step out so he quickly uses his wanking tool. After a blessed time skip, Marin and Wakana link up with Sejuna for costume fittings. As both girls slip into their outfits, Sejuna drops some solid critique for Wakana to help level up her Shion costume. Watching the whole thing go down, Marin feels pressure to say something smart, so when Wakana asks her opinion on the costume, she makes it painfully obvious that when intelligence was being handed out, she was busy chasing Discord mods. After Wakana hooks her up with her makeup, Marin checks herself out in the mirror and immediately becomes her own biggest fan. Once both girls are locked and loaded, they all agree to head out to the shoot location. After rolling up to the spot, the girls hang back while Wakana and Shinju get the camera situation sorted, chatting about their fits in the meantime. After a whole lot of waiting, Wakana finally walks in with Shinju, and the girls are rendered completely speechless. Back when the crew was out hunting for better shoot spots, Wakana had pulled Shinju aside to ask if she seriously had no interest in trying out cosplay. Different from her previous response, Shinju comes clean that she actually does want to cosplay, but since she isn't as cute, slim, or stunning as her older sister, whoever she tries to portray would come out looking like Pennywise. As Wakana takes in every word of Shinju's insecurities, he reassures her that Sejuna would embrace her wholeheartedly and that he'll go all out to help her nail the perfect cosplay look. And just like that, for the very first time, Shinju lets herself fully enjoy the thing she loves more than anything. With that settled, Wakana asks who she's trying to cosplay, and Sejuna reveals she wants to take on a male character from the exact same anime that Marin and Shinju are pulling looks from. The day after, Shinju swings by Wakana's place to get started on the costume. Sadly, two massive obstacles pop up during the fitting session. Shinju's Pluto-sized Milkies become a serious roadblock, forcing Wakana to break out the binding tape as a fix. When that still doesn't cut it, Wakana and Shinju take the problem to YouTube to hunt down a better solution. After locking in a fix, Wakana shifts focus to the wig, while Shinju watches him work and can't help but be low-key amazed by how hard Wakana goes for the craft. But when the topic shifts to setbacks, Wakana drops some real talk on Shinju that everybody has their own weak points, and that manages to take the edge off Shinju's spiral just a bit. Back in the present, as Shinju steps out in her finished cosplay, both Marin and Sajuna immediately praise her. The whole thing hits different for both Wakana and Shinju as all their hard work gets the recognition it truly deserved from the two cosplayers. During the photoshoot, Marin completely breaks focus and starts cheesing like an absolute goofball while striking poses alongside Sajuna. Sejuna's initial inner monologue is pure judgment toward cosplayers who don't take things seriously, but that wall crumbles the moment she clocks just how genuinely lit up Marin actually is. Later, Sejuna tracks down Wakana and gives him a proper thank you for stepping up and helping Shinju get into cosplay. She also brings up wanting to foot the bill for Shinju's costume, while Wakana pushes back and tells her not to even stress about it. Sejuna, however, shuts that down and tells Wakana to learn how to accept money like a normal person. Mid-convo, Sejuna starts beating herself up over being completely oblivious to what Shinju was most passionate about. But Wakana eases her guilt by pointing out that putting your interests out there is genuinely scary for a lot of people. Those words hit Sejuna differently, as she reflects on how Wakana has handled everything she holds dear with such genuine care and respect. It slowly dawns on her just what an incredibly solid guy Wakana actually is. Once the photoshoot wraps, the Inui sisters huddle up to scroll through all the shots together. Flipping through the pictures, Sejuna casually lets slip that she's low-key jealous of how effortlessly Shinju pulled off the cross-dressing look. Understandably, this completely catches Shinju off guard, since she never in a million years pictured her sister being envious of her beginner-level cosplay. So she presses Sejuna on it, genuinely confused, given how consistently stunning Sejuna looks in every single one of her own cosplays. Sejuna then comes clean that she only ever commits to characters she already knows will work with her look. As Shinju sits there absorbing the fact that even Sejuna is out here coveting what she doesn't have, it suddenly hits her that absolutely everyone on this planet is a miserable wreck, chasing things just out of their reach. A few days later, Wakana sits back and appreciates how holidays genuinely go hard because he gets to knock out work on his Hina dolls and still have bandwidth to stitch up fresh fits for Marin. This round, they're grinding on an extra unhinged costume since Marin is dead set on cosplaying a brazenly bold character named Veronica. Since the character is an albino baddie, Marin rolls up to Wakana's front door looking like she just got back from a 2-week vacation in the sun. After cluing Wakana in that it's all just foundation, Marin excuses herself to go hijack his shower. But since every piece of clothing she came in is absolutely soaked through with sweat, Wakana ends up tossing her some of his own clothes to change into. The second Marin steps back out, rocking his fit. Wakana experiences the most powerful hard-on of his entire existence. Then comes the costume trial portion, where Marin casually lifts her shirt to apply the foundation, and Wakana loses his freaking mind. Desperate need of a cooldown, Marin and Wakana head out for a shopping run, where Marin strong-arms him into trying on several fits he ends up absolutely despising. Later, the conversation circles back to the Veronica cosplay, and Wakana has to be fully transparent with Marin that he simply cannot be her guy on this one, seeing as he won't be able to function with one hand permanently grabbing his meat. With the sun absolutely roasting both Wakana and Marin, the two make the executive decision to duck into a manga cafe and decompress for a while. However, once they squeeze into a booth together, Wakana immediately starts squirming because Marin is sitting way too close for his cardiovascular health. But as per usual, Marin remains completely oblivious to the crisis unfolding inside Wakana's pants and just keeps shoving a manga in his face, gushing about how she's obsessed with the female lead Rizu because of her adorable hairstyle. Even though she's clearly itching to cosplay Rizu, Marin lets out a sad sigh and tells Wakana that she could never pull it off because she simply isn't cute enough for the character. But then she whips around to look at him and asks why he's making a face like he just discovered someone genuinely believes the earth is flat. After taking a moment to process the absolute nonsense that just left Marin's mouth, Wakana tells her straight up that the cosplay will look incredible on her. This sends Marin into an instant blushing spiral as she connects the dots and concludes that Wakana genuinely thinks she's cute. Right after, Wakana buries himself in the manga to break down exactly what Rizu's costume consists of and quickly figures out that the fit is honestly pretty light on details. That night, Marin sends a text to Wakana, saying she has locked in the most perfect location for the Rizu cosplay shoot. After dropping the details on him, the pair link up at the spot bright and early the very next day. The second Wakana steps inside, he realizes with full horror that Marin has dragged him to a love hotel, and while she is completely unbothered by this, his brain immediately starts running freaky highlights of Redo of Healer. Wakana desperately attempts to rewire his brain into seeing Marin as more than just a walking temptation, but the moment his eyes land on an oversized, vibrating cucumber sitting in the corner, he completely loses the plot all over again. Clocking Wakana's full system meltdown, Marin announces she'll dart off to throw on the costume quickly so they can knock out what they actually came here to do. With that, she slips out of the room, while Wakana proceeds to curse out the plot god for dropping him into a prime cheek-clapping environment with no balls to execute. Out of nowhere, Marin reappears wearing the costume. Wakana poured his soul into stitching together. As Marin completely loses her mind over how good the outfit is, Wakana spirals into panic mode, worrying that the costume might stray too far from what Rizu actually wears. Right on cue, Marin talks him off the ledge and assures him that making creative adjustments is totally valid when the source material barely gives you anything to work with. With that settled, Wakana and Marin lock in and get the shoot underway, but somewhere in the middle of it all, the two stumble straight into a spicy moment so charged it could power an entire city block. A few days roll by, and Wakana gets a frantic call from Marin, practically begging him to drag himself over to her place. When he shows up, Marin drops the bomb that she desperately needs help catching up on homework, or her dad is going to cut her clean out of the inheritance. Wakana raises an eyebrow and asks why the homework situation has gotten this out of hand, and Marin confesses that she has been grinding modeling jobs non-stop just to save up for a camera. After taking a breather, Marin pitches the idea of throwing on a horror movie to take the edge off, but Wakana says horror films aren't really his thing. Still, Marin waves off his concerns and promises it won't be that bad, but barely minutes into the movie, she is already looking green around the gills, while Wakana is sitting there completely stone-faced. Once the credits roll, Marin goes digging for her math workbook, only to have the gut-punch realization that she left it sitting at school. As they make the trek back to campus to grab it, Marin jokes that the empty school building is giving serious horror movie location vibes. While the two are busy goofing around, Marin yanks Wakana along to go check out the swimming pool. Things take a turn, though, when Wakana discovers that Marin's swimming skills are trash. A couple of days later, Wakana and Marin make plans to hit up a summer festival together. While Wakana stands around waiting for her to show, His jaw nearly hits the floor when Marin pulls up, rocking a stunning traditional outfit. Once the fireworks kick off, Wakana finds himself completely hypnotized by the explosion of colors lighting up the night sky. It hits him in that moment just how much everything in his world has shifted for the better ever since Marin crashed into his life. Once the fireworks wrap up, Marin starts whining about her shoes, which are absolutely destroying her feet. Somehow, this chain of events results in Wakana getting a piggyback ride, which Marin milks with zero shame and maximum joy. As the two keep moving through the night, Marin starts rambling about all the things they should do together next year, and Wakana can't help but let a big dumb smile spread across his face. Days later, back at school, Wakana sat there watching an anime Marin had thrown on his radar because she had her heart set on cosplaying one of the characters. Marin went full hype mode, describing exactly how she wanted the outfit to come together, and when Wakana asked whether she had always been into bunny girls, she told him everybody was. She delivered this line in the most unhinged way imaginable, so naturally, Bro pictured himself completely surrounded by a mob of bunny girl-obsessed weirdos. As she kept rambling about bunny suits, Wakana's brain randomly drifted off to his Hina dolls, and he just started nodding along like a dummy. Out of nowhere, Marin threw out the idea of booking a proper studio to shoot the photos, and Wakana immediately turned to stone. His mind shot straight back to that fateful day Marin channeled her inner succubus and made gallons of blood rush into his third leg. Marin quickly jumped in to clarify that they absolutely would not be going anywhere sketchy because her photographer, Homi Suzuka, had already put her onto a solid studio. She pulled up a Luna President cosplay that one of Suzuka's friends had shot and explained that those pictures were taken at the very studio Suzuka had vouched for. Blown away by how spot on the cosplay looked, Wakana gave her the thumbs up to go ahead and lock in the booking. The two then settled back into a chill silence until Nawa came barging in on the vibe, specifically looking for Marin. The tiny shortstop was fully heated at Marin for ghosting their Halloween planning meeting, so Marin hit her with an apology. Once Nawa finally chilled out, Marin waved Wakana goodbye and sprinted off ahead, while Nawa hung back to quietly size him up. That weekend, Marin was on the train rereading Wakana's text over and over because she genuinely could not process the fact that he had been the one to invite her over. Normally, she was always the one blowing up his phone first, but now that the situation was reversed, she was absolutely spiraling. When she actually showed up though, and found him looking like somebody had just run over his dog, she realized she had built it up way too much in her head. Wakana had only reached out because the bodysuit for her costume kept slipping out of place no matter what he tried. When Bro's processor started smoking from working overtime, Marin told him to breathe and floated the idea of using clear straps to keep the bodysuit up. Wakana pushed back, saying that solution would make the whole outfit look off, but she countered that they could clip it exactly the way stylists handled it during dress fittings. Wakana was not thrilled about it, but he reluctantly decided to give it a go anyway. Not long after, Wakana showed up at the craft store and laid out his design sketch for the guy running the place. The old man immediately jumped to the conclusion that the outfit was for Wakana himself, but chose to keep his opinions to himself. Right then, Marin walked in and the whole picture clicked into place, so the dude turned to Wakana and apologized for briefly assuming he was an aspiring crossdresser. On the walkover to grab the clear straps, the shop owner mentioned offhand that there was actually a completely different way to keep the bunny suit secured. With Wakana's go-ahead, he sketched out the adjustments directly on the design, breaking down how converting it into a corset would solve the whole problem. Marin asked if he was absolutely sure about that, and when he stood by it, she looked genuinely let down, like she had been low-key hoping for an excuse to give Wakana a full view of her bouncy assets. Meanwhile, Wakana was busy being disappointed in himself for not landing on that solution from the jump, but the manager told him to ease up on himself. He pointed out that it happened all the time where people get so caught up stressing that they completely miss what's been sitting right in front of them the whole time. Later, Wakana and Marin headed back to his place, and he wasted zero time fixing up the outfit. He then stepped out to give her space to try it on, but Marin called back out to him saying another problem had come up. Without even stopping to think, Wakana burst back into the room and immediately short-circuited at the sight of Marin's silky material spilling out. Once his brain finally rebooted, he bolted back out of the room and threw the door shut behind him, refusing to budge no matter how hard she knocked. The following day, They rolled up to the studio Suzuka had recommended, and before heading off to get changed, Marin told Wakana to relax because she had already handled the situation with her plot armor. But when she stepped out, sporting a black garter belt, every single thought evacuated Wakana's skull. He knew there was no way he was functioning with her standing there looking like a full temptation. So he went ahead and said exactly that. Marin explained that under the garter, she wore skin-toned tights, but that detail did absolutely nothing to slow his brain from going to inappropriate places. Bro's hands were literally trembling as he snapped her photos, and the moment Marin accidentally put some extra sauce into her movement, he immediately called a full timeout. Completely unaware of the civil war happening in his pants, Marin pivoted to talking about a different style of stockings she had been eyeing, and started pulling up pictures to show him. All that accomplished was cranking his suffering up another 3 notches, but Wakana weathered the steamy torment like an absolute soldier. She then casually mentioned she would be debuting the new stockings at Halloween and invited him to come through and celebrate with her and the crew. When Halloween actually arrived, Wakana was locked in as the official group photographer for the night. After everyone rolled into the karaoke club, Nawa took the mic and went off while the rest of the squad kicked back around the table, talking amongst themselves. When the girls brought up the fact that Wakana had made Marin's whole outfit and done her makeup from scratch, Morita piped up and asked how exactly a guy ends up learning how to do makeup. The question hit Wakana like a freight train and sent him straight back to the memory of his childhood friend calling him a weirdo, and he started internally panicking. Luckily, Shiki, the other dude in the group, stepped in and said it was completely normal for guys to work in makeup and reminded Morita that his own older brother did exactly that. Marin jumped in after and mentioned that Wakana's whole family was in the Hina doll business, which somehow caused the clueless Morita to launch into a full passionate speech about how Hina dolls were the single greatest things he had ever encountered in his life. That started a full conversation thread, and everyone started throwing in their own opinions, leaving Wakana completely baffled as to why nobody was looking at him sideways or calling him a twink the way his childhood friend had. Just as it was slowly dawning on him that these people had absolutely zero intentions of judging him, Nawa suddenly dropped the question of whether he and Marin were actually dating. Wakana nearly spit out his drink when Noah dropped that bombshell, so the whole group immediately checked if he was alright. After making sure he wasn't dying, they confessed that every single one of them thought he and Marin were an item. Shiki even brought up the fact that they'd been spotted hanging out together at the summer festival. Marin made zero effort to deny showing up at the festival with him, which set Morita off about not being included. Noah followed suit and pressed them to finally come clean about whether they were together, so Wakana rushed to shut it down. Right then, Karen and Seira, 2 other friends of theirs, burst through the door, so Marin instantly yanked Wakana toward the bathroom. As he cleaned the stain from his shirt, Marin stayed outside, scrubbing the same mess off the head of his rabbit suit. She also couldn't stop thinking about why he'd shot down the dating rumor the way he had, even if it was the correct call. While she sat there brooding, 2 certified Riz threats, Manabu and Hikaru, walked up and asked if they could have a word. The second Wakana stepped out and saw Marin chatting with those dudes. He jumped straight to the conclusion that they were trying their luck. So he stepped in and told the blonde one that he'd sub in for Marin, since he was more of a follow orders kind of guy. Manabu was the first to clock what was actually happening, and once he broke it down for Hikaru, dude was absolutely horrified. Turns out, they were Marin's personal stylists, and the moment Hikaru laid eyes on her, he couldn't hold back from roasting her hair situation. Once that came to light, Wakana was so mortified he genuinely wished Sukuna had made him the one to get sliced up. The cringe didn't leave him even after they walked away, and as he moped around, Marin finally clocked that he'd stepped in to defend her. Touched by that realization, she planted a kiss on his cheek, making his head shoot up instantly. Before Marin could even process what she'd done, he asked if she was pissed at him because he caught the sound of her clicking her tongue. Realizing he was talking about her kissing the costume head, Marin leaves, way too flustered to own up to it. Meanwhile, Wakana trailed behind her, convinced she was actually mad. The following morning at school, Marin didn't show up due to a cold, so Wakana shot her a text to check in on her. Marin left him on red, so Bro proceeded to spend the next 3 class periods locked onto his phone screen like a useless simp. Later on, he pulled up to Marin's apartment, loaded with food and meds, and the girl was genuinely shook to find him at her door. He confessed that the anxiety had been eating him alive so much that he played sick just to ditch class and come see her. Before she could even get a word out, she passed out, so he scooped her up and carried her back indoors. His first move was heading to the bathroom to hunt down some fresh clothes for her to switch into. After sorting that out, he whipped up some food for her and served it himself once it was done. Mid-meal, Maring randomly burst into tears, which sent Wakana into full panic mode, but once she started expressing gratitude, he understood she was just being emotional. She finally cleaned her plate and downed the meds, so he went to get up and handle the dishes, but Maring grabbed him before he could. Wakana dropped back down, and in her tired little voice she thanked him once more and asked him not to leave, so he stayed. A couple hours down the line, she opened her eyes feeling way more human and thanked him for showing up to take care of her, right as she swore she'd make a hospital trip the following day. Noah and the crew showed up and started going crazy on the doorbell. Wakana freaked out the second he clocked them on the intercom, so he snatched his stuff and scrambled to the balcony to dodge getting caught. A few days after that, the two of them headed out for another cosplay outing, this time at the aquarium. As they wandered around, Marin caught sight of someone cosplaying a character from a well-known idol game and nearly lost her entire composure. Once she snapped out of it and realized she was being weird about it, she apologized and asked the girl what was going on, since she was crouching on the floor like she was practicing how to swallow. The girl said she'd misplaced the hook for her skirt, so Marin and Wakana jumped in and offered to help track it down. Shortly after volunteering, they located the hook, and the girl, who introduced herself as Amane, thanked them for the assist. Wakana and Marin returned the favor and introduced themselves, and then Marin asked Amane if she could snap a photo together. Amane refused, politely explaining she couldn't because her costume was messed up, but Wakana told her to chill and offered to patch up the skirt. Amane pushed back on the idea, but the dynamic duo talked her into going along with it. The catch was that Wakana couldn't just waltz into the women's bathroom being a dude, so when he flagged that, Amane said she was totally fine with using the men's room. Wakana was taken aback and pushed back on that, but then Amane hit him with an even bigger reveal that she was actually a guy. Once they were in the bathroom, Wakana kept stealing glances at Amane, desperately trying to make sense of what level of foreign scam Amane was. Amane was too busy digging through his bag to catch Wakana staring, and when Wakana's gaze dropped to the bag, he spotted a bottle of liquid glue inside. For a moment, Wakana's brain started spiraling over what exactly Amane was using that glue for, and it nearly sent him off the deep end. Back outside, Marin, who was still waiting around, bumped into Suzuka, who was rocking a very Nanami-coded fit. After an extremely hype reunion moment, Suzuka gassed up Marin's cosplay look. But then, her memory served up the traumatic flashback of Marin going commando at the school festival. Out of curiosity, she asked Marin if she had anything on beneath her dress, and Marin let her know she had shorts on this time. Marin even went so far as to lift the hem to prove it, but Suzuka was still scarred from last time and wanted absolutely no part of it. Eventually, once Wakana finished patching up Amane's costume, the three of them regrouped with Marin in the common area for a quick catch-up. Since the glue was still living rent-free in his head, Wakana finally asked Amane what it was for, and Amane dropped that he used it to glue his hair to his face for close-up shots. He pulled up the pictures to show them, and as Wakana scrolled through, he nearly dropped the phone when he came across one where Amane was more busty as a stepmom. Amane clarified that it was all part of the costume, and offered to bring them to the shop where he scored it, leaving Wakana looking pale and Marin absolutely vibrating. Not long after, the three of them rode up to a cosplay store, and Amane pointed out one of the fake balloons on display to Wakana and Marin. Marin said it'd come in perfect if she ever had to cosplay as a busty character, so Amane slapped it onto Wakana's chest to demo how the thing actually fit. Wakana was completely lost for words, seeing himself like that, but Marin was already hyped and dove straight in, squishing them around like bread dough. Poor dude felt totally humiliated and violated, so he spun around and flat out refused to let Marin keep going. Once the fake melons hype finally died down, they started browsing the rest of the shop, with Amane stepping up as their personal tour guide. When Wakana asked about his makeup routine, Amane broke it down the best he could and even pulled out the eyeliner he used to make his eyes hit different. He also whipped out an orange-tinted concealer that he said was his go-to for covering up his stubble. Meanwhile, while Marin and Amane were going through the rest of the cosmetics, Wakana fully lost it and went into complete shopaholic mode, acting like he'd just entered makeup paradise. Once they drifted over to the next aisle, Wakana clocked some stuff he had zero clue about, so Amane filled him in that cosplayers typically used them to build props like weapons. That same aisle also had character wigs, and Amane pointed out that cosplayers, with absolutely no DIY skills, would just grab pre-made pieces straight from the shop. To back it up, he yanked the hairbow right off his head, and Wakana's jaw genuinely dropped. Amane also mentioned that there was a whole floor upstairs dedicated to full outfits, and that's actually where he'd copped the costume he had on. Later, once they bounced from the store, Wakana snapped a pic of Marin and Amane, and right as they were hyping up how fire they looked, Marin's face tape decided to peace out. She freaked out and bolted over to Wakana to get it sorted, and while he was handling that, two girls walked up to Amane and asked for a photo. Amane said yes, but made sure to let the girls know he was actually a dude and checked if they were still down to take that photo. Shockingly, the girls got even more amped after finding that out, and as they went absolutely feral over how perfectly he pulled off his look, Wakana jumped in to be the photographer. Marin stood back watching for a sec before sliding herself into the mix, and before anyone knew it, the whole thing had escalated into a proper photo shoot with two more people jumping in. Like 1,000 clicks later, the photo shoot finally wound down. The extras dipped to handle their own business, and Marin, Amane, and Wakana found somewhere to park themselves. While they were vibing and chatting, Marin asked Amane what first pulled him into the cosplay world. Amane said it all kicked off back when his older sister did his makeup on him for the very first time. He was totally shook, staring back at his own reflection, because he couldn't recognize the person looking back. But his sister hyped him up and said he looked amazing, and he took her word for it. From that point on, he started asking her to teach him how to do it, and every time they wrapped up a session, she'd let him borrow one of her fits. Once he got into cosplaying for real, his mom got in on the action too, and her constant words of encouragement pushed him to keep leveling up his skills. Amane confessed that puberty basically ghosted him when it was supposed to show up, and because of that, his classmates used to clown on him non-stop. All that trash talk made him genuinely start to resent his own appearance, and the only moments he ever felt good about how he looked were when he was in cosplay. The deeper he got into cosplay, the more his confidence shot up, and eventually, that same energy had a girl sliding in with a confession back in college. One day, though, he had his girlfriend come over, and the second she spotted his cosplay gear, she jumped straight to the conclusion that he was cheating. Amane had no option but to spill the truth about his hobby, and her reaction of pure disgust wasn't exactly a shocker. She gave him an ultimatum to toss his costumes, so Amane dumped her on the spot because ain't nobody got time for a partner who can't show up for them. Wakana was floored hearing all of that, but Marin hit different and shocked Amane by actually bursting into tears for him. She called his ex totally heartless and straight up declared she would have beaten the life out of her if she'd been there. Amane appreciated the energy and told her not to sweat it, because he'd already moved past all of that. He did own up to having thought about walking away from it all, but he couldn't bring himself to do it because he knew he'd spend forever resenting himself for abandoning something that mattered to him. Hearing all that, Marin finally chilled out and grabbed a tissue to deal with her runny nose situation. Amane then came clean to Wakana that he'd been low-key dreading Wakana would label him some kind of weird freak once he found out he was male. Wakana shut that down immediately and told him he was literally the last dude on Earth who'd ever judge him for that, so Amane apologized for assuming the worst. He also vowed to never jump to conclusions about people again because every single person he'd crossed paths with that day had welcomed him with open arms, and it made him genuinely happy he'd shown up. Later, once Marin and Amane got changed back, Amane said his goodbyes to his new crew, and they locked in plans to link up again whenever they ended up at the same event. A few days down the line, Wakana grabbed lunch with his grandpa and then headed out to tag along with Marin for a shoot. While Marin was in her bag on set, he got to talking with the magazine's editor and found out that Marin had been booking way more shoots recently. Wakana remembered Marin mentioning she wanted to cop a new camera and connected the dots on why she'd been snatching up more work. The woman then dropped that she'd already pitched Marin the idea of becoming a permanent face for the magazine, but Marin had turned it down flat, saying her hobbies kept her too tied up. Since none of her arguments could budge Marin, she was hoping Wakana could step in and put in a word, since she figured Marin would actually hear it coming from her boyfriend. The moment Wakana caught that she was under the impression they were dating. He wasted zero time clearing the air that his whole deal with Marin was strictly business, nothing romantic. That answer only left the woman more puzzled, and she started low-key wondering if Wakana was some kind of paid companion. A few hours later, the shoot finally wrapped, and the manager clocked Marin's fit and told her she was looking fire. Marin appreciated the love and explained she'd gone all out today because she and Wakana had a birthday bash to get to. She let the woman know they still had to swing by the bakery to pick up the cake before bouncing and said her goodbyes to the whole crew. As the two of them strolled off, the woman fully locked in on the idea that they were definitely a couple heading out to celebrate Wakana's birthday. The reality, though, was that it was actually Marin's fave idol's birthday, and she had gone ahead and ordered the cake specifically to celebrate that. She even forced Wakana to strap on a mask of the idol's face, and he stood there completely speechless, watching Marin hug and serenade the idol's body pillow. The longer he watched her, the more he contrasted this version with the polished Marin he'd seen on set, and he realized she'd always just be the same chaotic girl he'd grown to know. A few days later, their teacher let the class know that at the upcoming school festival, each class would earn points depending on how many people showed up to their event. When the festival wrapped up, whichever class had the most points would take the win. But she also mentioned that the pageant winner would get a leg up on every other class. The whole class absolutely lost it after hearing that, and Shiki threw out Marin's name to rep their class. Before Marin even had a chance to say yes or no, their teacher dropped that the pageant was going to be a gender bender situation. That little update was everything Marin needed to hear, because she could finally rock a cosplay at school with zero pushback. She jumped at the chance to join the show right away, and Noah wasted no time asking who she was planning to cosplay as. Marin took a moment to think it over before dropping that she was going as Rei from Prez Host. The whole class was stunned by that, and watching the girls go all crazy about the show, Wakana clocked that it must be seriously popular. One of the girls then pressed Marin on which Rei outfit she was going with, and Marin said the one from the bento scene, which sent everyone into shock. Right then, their teacher turned to Marin and reminded her that on top of putting her costume together, she also needed to bring the charisma for the crowd. Marin let her know she had the charm part handled, and then turned to Wakana, declaring that their moment had officially arrived. Wakana was caught completely off guard that she'd called him out like that, and the rest of the class started whispering about why the loser was being brought up. It was Noah who stepped in with the answer, spilling that Wakana was actually behind every single one of Marin's costumes, which blew everyone's minds. Nobody had any idea the silent background dude was holding skills like that, and they hyped him up to go Kanye West mode on the new fit. That evening, Wakana sat down to watch Press Host, starting from the bento scene where Koyomi, the main girl, handed her lunch to some random guy chilling on a bench before sprinting off to school. Later on, Koyomi and her bestie spotted a whole crowd of students swarming around Rei, the student council president. Rei had everyone wrapped around her finger because she was gorgeous, smart, and athletic, and the more Koyomi looked at her, the more she felt herself being pulled in. Right at that moment, Rei glanced up, and the second their eyes locked, the whole world around them seemed to disappear. Of course, the whole vibe died by Koyomi's friend, who reminded her they had to bounce for their next class. After school, Koyomi got summoned to the student council room and was caught off guard when Rei showed up with her bento box. Rei clarified that she was the person who'd received the bento and dropped the bombshell that she'd been dressed as a dude because she had a part-time gig at a host club. Koyomi was absolutely floored by that reveal, and from that point on, she started getting way more tangled up in Rei's life as a host. One evening, Koyomi showed up with food for Rei, and the moment Rei popped the lid, she went to say something nice about it. But Koyomi shut that down immediately, saying her basic home cooking was nowhere near the level of the expensive things Rei's customers usually brought her. Rei was at a total loss for words, and Koyomi disappeared into her own thoughts, telling herself she was nothing special because Rei acted the same way with everybody. Meanwhile, Rei had no clue how to let Koyomi know that her cooking reminded her of her deceased mother's food, and that being around her after a rough day genuinely made her happy. She was also convinced Koyomi would never believe a word of it, and that was the struggle she kept running into. By the time the movie was over, Wakana was a crying mess because he was hurting for both girls who just couldn't get their feelings out. The following day at school, while kicking it with Marin at the top of the staircase, the two of them got into it about Rei and her whole aura. Marin was fully on board that Rei was it, but admitted she couldn't stop gushing over a character called Tsumugi. That girl had gone out of her way to stand up for Koyomi when the other hosts came at her just to mess with Rei. After geeking out over Tsumugi, Marin tuned into Wakana as he broke down his plan for her costume, which was going to be a 3-piece suit. He also walked her through how he'd handle her makeup to give her a more masculine look, and Marin reminded him that they still needed to track down Rei's iconic rainbow rose. She threw out the idea of grabbing one from a flower shop, but Wakana hit her with the reality that they were flat broke. The only move they had was to snag a fake plastic rose and spray paint it to pass as the real deal. As the conversation kept going, Wakana brought up that he was stressing about time since he still needed to pitch in with the interior decorating for their class cafe. Since there wasn't much they could do about that, Marin offered to go out and handle the shopping herself, so Wakana put together a full list of everything she needed. Marin was low-key anxious about doing it solo, but she kept that to herself and headed out, not knowing Wakana was internally panicking too. When Wakana made it back to class, his classmates looked at him confused and asked what he was doing there, and he told them he came back to help with the decorating. They immediately clocked the problem and asked how he was supposed to juggle helping them and finishing Marin's costume. Wakana tried to play it cool and act like he had it all under control, but deep down he knew he was capping himself, and they told him to just focus on knocking the pageant costume out of the park. But since they knew he'd guilt-trip himself for bailing on them, they told him they'd hit him up anytime they needed an extra set of hands. Once that was sorted, Noah asked where Marin had gone, and Wakana let her know she'd headed out to grab the supplies. The whole class went into full panic mode and demanded to know how he could hand off something that important to scatterbrained Marin. Wakana snatched up his bag and bolted out of there, blowing up Marin's phone as he ran to figure out where she'd ended up. Eventually, once Wakana linked up with Marin at the store, they pulled out the suit sketch for the manager and described exactly what kind of fabric they needed. The guy brought out what he had in stock, and Marin immediately lost it, saying it was exactly what they needed. Even though the fabric wasn't cheap at all, she didn't hesitate to pay up and started hyping Wakana up about how excited she was to see it all come to life. The following morning, Wakana showed up at school first thing to start grinding on the outfit. When Marin rolled in later, he clocked her yawning and asked if she'd barely slept the night before. Marin mentioned she'd gotten up way earlier than normal and then dropped a bombshell that she'd packed him lunch. She pointed out that he usually grabbed food from the cafeteria, but since it's always packed, it was eating into time he could be putting toward the costume. Wakana had no idea whether to feel touched or terrified, because the only dishes this human cooking disaster could make were fried rice and white rice. Since he had no clue which variety of fried rice she had thrown together, he tried to ask, but Marin got all flustered and told him to hold on until lunchtime. The time crawling toward lunch was pure agony, and when the moment finally hit, he trudged back to the sewing room looking like a dude walking to his doom. But what Marin yanked out of her bag wasn't fried rice at all. It was spam onigiri, and the second Wakana laid eyes on it, relief washed over his entire body. He hyped her up and thanked her for the food, saying his heart had been doing sprints the whole time waiting for whatever she'd made. Marin took that the wrong way, reading it as him being pumped to eat her cooking, which just added fuel to her delusions, so she swore she'd make them again. Over the next several days, Marin kept showing up with lunch for Wakana, but every single meal was rice-based, and the suffering boy had no option but to chow down with a grin plastered on his face. With 9 days left until the cultural festival, the pageant guidelines got slapped up on the board for everyone to read. Marin's girls were grumbling that 1 minute per contestant to win over the crowd wasn't nearly enough, but Marin said she could make it work. Then one of the girls threw out the idea of doing the host champagne call, this whole performance hosts put on to hype up their customers. They pulled up a clip from Press Host, showing the hosts running the champagne call, and after soaking it in for a bit, Marin cooked up her own version. Once the girls read what she'd come up with, they told her to try it out on their classmates to see if it landed, and Marin was down. They then shifted to talking about Rei and how she had this ability to make people melt with a single glance. The girls were gushing so intensely that they reminded Wakana who'd been blending into the background the whole time of his namesake's fanbase going feral at an anime con. It took them hearing him utter something about the bento scene before they even registered he existed and started pulling him into the convo. Mid-conversation, Marin randomly got the genius idea to play host and go full character, and Wakana almost completely lost it. Noah jumped in on the bit too, and just as they were all hyping themselves up over it, Shiki showed up hunting for Wakana to help rearrange some stuff in the classroom. He also reminded the girls they still needed to settle on a menu, so everyone got up and said their see you laters to Marin. Left on her own, Marin tried to chill and wait for Wakana to come back, but boredom hit her like a freight train, and she started trying to sew a button onto the jacket. But she stashed her little project the second Wakana stepped back in, letting her know their classmates were ready to run through the champagne call. She was not about leaving, but since she had zero say in it, she let out this full witch cackle and bolted for the door. On her way out, she swore she'd come back and sort it, and it was only after she'd already dipped that Wakana spotted the absolute disaster she'd made of that button. 4 days out from the festival, Wakana was in his room flipping through a magazine, hunting for any tips on how to masculinize Marin's silhouette, but came up completely empty. The next day, Marin squeezed into some shapewear that made her as flat as your babe, all to test drive the suit. The moment her friends got a look at her in the suit, they all lost it, saying she looked amazing, but Wakana's face looked like he about to throw up. He told Marin it was running too large, then crouched down next to her to start making fixes. When the group checked her out again, they all agreed the change was massive, and said she was finally giving genuine Rei vibes. That's when it clicked for Wakana that he should have measured her with the shapewear on from the jump, so he apologized and committed to fixing everything. Everyone else said he was being too hard on himself, but Wakana was dead set on making Marin a carbon copy of Rei. He also pointed out that she needed to figure out how to move like a guy if she was actually going to sell her portrayal of Rei. Kamen brought Amane to mind, and how his whole demeanor had everyone convinced he was a girl. Their friends started asking who Amane even was, so Marin pulled up the pics they'd snapped at the cosplay event. While the girls were losing their minds over how fine he was, Morita sprinted over and begged Marin to link him up with Amane so he could test his Riz game. Marin said, sure. But the second she told him Amane was actually a dude, Morita crashed out. While he was over there moping in the corner, Wakana strolled up and asked if he'd be willing to teach Marin how to carry herself like a guy, since Andrew Tate hasn't been posting lately. Morita grabbed that assignment with both hands and went straight to work molding Marin into his vision. By the time his training session wrapped, Marin's stance had gone full masculine, and everyone around them agreed he'd actually pulled it off. Right on cue, Koga rolled up to hand out some water and brought Murakami along, except Murakami was out here acting all low-key and mysterious. Turns out he was scared of letting everyone know he was into the cosplay because they'd connect the dots that he was a fan of the series and clown on him for it. When he owned up to feeling embarrassed about it, Wakana told him to let it go since the series was massively popular and had a huge fan base. Wakana's response got Murakami to finally lower his walls, and he asked if he could snap a photo of the suit to show his sister. Wakana said yes, genuinely touched that someone was showing love for his work. When Murakami lined up the shot, he deliberately kept Marin's face out of frame, and once she caught on, she started beefing about it, while Wakana just stood back and watched the whole scene unfold. The following day, Wakana and Marin grabbed an artificial rose and spray painted it to mimic Rei's rainbow rose, but their paint job came out looking rough. While they were trying to work out what to do with the rose, Karen and Sarah showed up. The pair were let down to find Marin out of her costume, since Noah had been hyping them up about how fire Marin looked wearing it. Once they spotted the messed up rose, Sarah mentioned that she actually knew how to make a rainbow rose, so Marin and Wakana got on their knees and begged her to show them. Sarah said yes, then told them to hold tight in the chemistry room while she headed out to grab what they needed. When she came back, she was clutching a real white rose and drenched in sweat from having to sprint back and forth. She then walked them through how to actually make a rainbow rose. First, she sliced the stem open with a box cutter, then stirred food coloring into separate test tubes before sticking the split ends of the stem into each one. Then, she propped the tubes inside a beaker to keep them upright and let them know that by the following day, the rainbow rose would be done. Wakana and Marin were completely blown away by what she pulled off, so they asked where she'd learned to do something like that. Seira told them she'd actually made one for a solo research project back in the day, so Wakana expressed his gratitude for her dropping that knowledge on them. Sarah tried to wave off his thanks, since she didn't feel like she'd done anything that major, but Wakana was quick to tell her otherwise. He came clean about how he'd been planning to grab another fake rose and paint every single petal by hand, since the spray paint attempt had completely bombed. The fact that she had spared him all that headache gave Sarah a real sense of pride, and she told them there was something genuinely wholesome about people leaning on you. Later that evening, when Wakana and Marin got to his place, his grandfather greeted them and let them know that dinner was on the table. Marin was thrilled about the food and headed straight to the dining room, but Wakana hung back in the hallway, so his grandpa told him that for the rest of the festival, he'd be handling all their meals. His grandfather's words hit him with the realization that he'd been going at everything solo out of fear that people would see him as a nuisance. But that wasn't the reality at all, because everyone in his corner was more than ready to lend a hand with whatever he needed. On day one of the cultural festival, Morita and Koga were hanging in the sewing room, venting about how Class 3 had snatched all their customers. Wakana and Marin were also in there, taking care of the final costume fitting. Not long after, Shiki rolled in with food for Wakana, since he'd been so caught up he'd skipped eating, and Morita and Koga took the chance to ask if Class 3 still had them beat. Shiki said, yeah, they did, but made it clear he wasn't about to just roll over and take the L. He said it with so much conviction that he reignited the competitive spirit in the guys, so they bounced with him to try and reclaim their position at the top. Wakana wasn't sure they could pull it off, but Marin told him they absolutely could because their classmates were not the type to give up. She then went off about how the characters in Press Host were always showing up for one another and said that was literally the biggest reason she was obsessed with the show. She then announced that she was going to walk onto that stage like she owned it, rocking the outfit he made her, and bring home the pageant win for their class. The following day, the day of the actual pageant, Marin bolted to the sewing room right after finishing up in class. While she was fawning over the completed costume, Wakana asked her to start getting ready so he could handle her makeup before everyone else showed up. But of course, they all walked in the second he was about to start, because they were dying to see how cosplayers did their makeup. All those eyes on him nearly sent Wakana into a full-on panic attack, but Marin's voice snapped him back to reality. When he called to mind her fired-up expression from the previous day, and the weight of everyone depending on him, he pushed his nerves down and got to it. A couple of hours later, the pageant kicked off, and the instant Marin stepped onto that stage, the crowd absolutely lost it. Even the student council president, who was meant to stay completely neutral as a judge, couldn't tear her eyes away from the absolute stunner that was Marin. Standing in the crowd, Wakana had his eyes fixed on Marin, and flashes of all her previous cosplays started flooding his thoughts. In that instant, she lit up like a star, and he couldn't bring himself to look away as emotions he couldn't quite name started swirling around inside him. When Marin gave him credit for her whole look, his breath caught in his throat, and he completely lost the ability to speak. The hosts then dared her to win the crowd over, and Marin delivered exactly that with her classmates riding alongside her. The council president's surprise jump-in during her performance was what sealed the deal and locked in Marin's victory. Later, as the class went all out celebrating their win, everyone swarmed around Marin and Wakana, gassing them up and throwing questions at them left and right. Shiki then dropped that he'd booked a karaoke room for the celebration, and everyone was absolutely buzzing. Meanwhile, Wakana didn't feel like he earned a spot at the party since all he'd done was work on the costume. The second they heard that, his classmates shut him down fast, because without the costume he made, Marin wouldn't have taken the pageant, and they never would have topped Class 3. They eventually talked him into coming to the party, but after a couple hours of Nawa's non-stop singing and light conversation, he slipped outside to catch a breather. When Marin tracked him down, she let out a sigh of relief, because she'd been convinced he got tired of it all, and dipped. As they talked, he gave Marin her flowers for the play she made with the student council president. Marin boasted that she did it because that kind of move was practically certified to make anyone weak in the knees, but then flushed hard when she remembered that she and Wakana had been in a pretty similar situation. When Wakana checked in and asked if she was alright, she said she was fine, so he steered the conversation toward the other things the karaoke spot had to offer. Finding out he'd never been there, Marin dragged him over to the arcade where he burned through nearly all his cash on a claw machine just to win her a stuffed cat. As a beaming Marin squeezed her prize, she spotted a Purikura photo booth, and it hit her that she'd never actually taken a picture with Wakana. Just as she worked up the nerve to ask him to take one with her, Morita, Koga, Shiki, and Murakami came rolling in. Marin tried her best to shoo them away, but the boys completely blanked her and took their own photos with Wakana, leaving her absolutely heated. A little while later, Marin hit up the salon to get her hair fixed and straight up flexed her plushie on the stylists. She also pulled out the photo Wakana had snapped with the boys, since he'd handed over his own copy to her. Midway through the appointment, Manabu randomly called out that Marin had put on a little weight that set Hikaru off, lecturing her about keeping up with her model diet, but Manabu straight up told him to zip it. Marin stood there gazing at her reflection, squinting hard to spot what Manabu was seeing, but came up empty. Ryo backed her up, saying she couldn't notice a difference either, so Manabu started thinking he'd imagined the whole thing. Way later that day, after wrapping up her photo shoot, Marin was back at it, showing off her plushie to her makeup artist and coworker, hyping them up about how her crush had snagged it for her. While they were chatting, the editor walked in and started gassing up her coworker for absolutely killing it during the shoot, and Marin co-signed every word. As the girls started getting all flustered, the makeup artist dropped the news that her radiance was coming from a new boyfriend. Marin immediately lost it over the reveal and begged to see a photo of the man in question. Right at that moment, the editor called out Marin's name, and she figured she was about to get gassed up too, but got hit with a curveball when the woman told her she'd packed on weight. She followed it up by reminding Marin that the summer collection shoot was coming up fast and told her to shed the extra pounds before it kicked off. On the walk back home, Marin kept telling herself the editor was totally off-putting about the whole weight thing, but she couldn't stop herself from pausing and checking if she really needed to stay off-putting the second she passed a window. Then, something clicked in her head, and she booked it home and made a beeline straight to her wardrobe. She yanked out the black dress Wakana had sewn for her and slipped it on, only to find she couldn't get the zipper to budge. Refusing to face reality, she started trying on outfit after outfit and only calmed down once something actually fit. While she was busy blaming a big dinner for why nothing else was fitting, she spotted her stomach poking out just a tiny bit and completely fell apart. The following day, while kicking it with her crew, she spilled about the weight situation, and the girls claimed they hadn't picked up on anything. Okay, more like Daya and Rune said they hadn't noticed. Noah, on the other hand, admitted she'd clocked it since the school festival, and Marin practically wanted to strangle her. Daya and Rune were confused about how they'd missed it, until they remembered she'd been rocking shapewear the whole time. Poor Marin melted into her seat, completely defeated, and said she had no option but to start dieting, even though she had zero clue how the weight had even gotten there. That evening, she swung by Wakana's place for dinner, and as always, they rolled out the welcome mat for her. After eating, she started tackling the dishes, but Wakana told her to leave them since she needed to get going before it got too late. He offered to escort her all the way to the station, but Marin insisted she was fine on her own, so he just saw her to the door. On her way out, he handed her some food he'd prepped for her breakfast the next morning, and Marin thanked him for being so sweet. As she set off down the road, the scent of the food hit her nose, and she decided she couldn't possibly wait until she got home to dig in. But her excitement crashed hard into panic the moment it hit her that Wakana's packed meals had been the culprit behind her weight gain all along. The next day at school, while eating lunch together, she filled Wakana in on the whole weight situation and let him know she was officially on a diet. Wakana was genuinely thrown off to hear she'd gained weight and questioned whether she'd been eating anything beyond her usual meals. Marin couldn't even make eye contact when he asked that, so she fumbled through some vague half-answer like a goober and left him to connect the dots himself. Once Wakana figured out she'd been treating his packed breakfasts as a second dinner every night, he ran the numbers on her calorie count and was absolutely floored. Marin read his stunned face as judgment and jumped into defense mode, arguing it was totally not her fault his cooking was just that fire. Ever the non-judgmental one, Wakana calmly told her that if she got back on her normal schedule, the extra weight would come right off. Right then, her phone buzzed with a notification, and once she'd read through it, she threw out an invite for Wakana to come shopping with her the next day. Wakana was down since the destination was in Shibuya, and Marin was more than happy about that. The following day, after class, the two headed to a park, and Marin whipped out the loose socks she'd picked up. She passed one over to Wakana and got him to help stretch it out because Hikaru had told her that stretching them was the secret to making them look their best. Once they were stretched to her liking, Marin threw them on and showed them off to Wakana with full-on enthusiasm before asking him to snap a pic. Wakana said sure, but nearly short-circuited when she passed him an actual camera instead of her phone. He thought back to all those times she'd talked about wanting one and couldn't wrap his head around the fact that she'd actually gone and gotten it. Marin cracked up at his reaction and casually mentioned the camera had just shown up the day before. She was low-key glowing with pride over it since she'd stacked up so many jobs just to afford the thing. Wakana got curious and asked how she'd even known which camera to get, and she said she'd hit up Suzuka for recommendations. Suzuka had appointed her toward the Kiss M because it was pretty budget-friendly, but Marin had really just copped it because she'd convinced herself the M was short for Marin. Wakana just blinked at her in disbelief because, honestly, there was nothing worth saying to counter that kind of logic. He flipped through the camera manual, and once he had a handle on how everything worked, he was set to shoot. The hyped-up girl twirled her pigtails and explained she'd gone all out with her look for the shoot since she'd put cosplay on hold until she was back to her usual size. She told Wakana to switch the camera over to portrait mode, which he did, and then they got the shoot rolling. The very first shot came out so crisp and gorgeous that Wakana couldn't hold back from raving about how good the camera was. They kept the shoot going, and since Marin was chatting and moving around the whole time, every shot ended up with this super candid, natural feel. Once the shoot wrapped, they sat together going through the photos, and Marin let Wakana know she'd be rolling up to a cosplay event that weekend, but as a photographer this time. She'd gotten word that Amane was going to be there and was already hyped to photograph him in his cosplay. Wakana mentioned he'd also be at the event, so she asked if he was finally jumping into cosplay himself, and he shot that down immediately. He said that ever since Amane had dragged them to that costume shop, he'd caught feelings for prop crafting. He went down a research rabbit hole and came across a dude called Akira who put out videos showing off his whole prop making process. He slid into the guy's DMs, and Akira hit him back saying he'd be at the cosplay event that weekend, which is exactly why Wakana was showing up. Marin was genuinely pumped for him, and after smashing the follow button on Akira's account, she headed over to Wakana's place to snap some shots of his grandfather. Once it's the weekend, Gojo and Marin rode up to the cosplay event as a duo, but while Marin dipped to snap some pics, Gojo held it down at the entrance, waiting for Akira to pull up. Now about Akira, it turns out he was actually a she, and she was currently posted up in the bathroom having a smoke while going through the message Gojo had sent her. Meanwhile, Marin ran into Suzuka, and the two bonded over the fact that they were basically matching with their cameras. After chatting for a bit, Marin brought up how it was weird that Amane still hadn't shown up, especially since he'd hit her up saying he was already there. Turns out Amane was busy striking poses for some otaku with the camera. He was headed over to find Marin, but someone had pulled him aside and requested a quick photo. Amane said yes, but then got caught off guard when a whole crowd started queuing up for their turn, and now he had zero idea how to escape the situation. Luckily, Marin showed up to track him down, and he was beyond grateful to spot his girl. She hyped up his fit and then brought him over to Suzuka, who nearly lost the ability to form words because she could not wrap her head around the fact that Amane was a guy. Once she managed to pull herself together, she showered him with compliments and declared that she owed him one for gracing her vision with his looks. Since handing him cash would be disrespectful, she volunteered to hop in the photographer queue and help him fend off anyone else trying to get a shot. Amane had no clue that was even an option, so he genuinely thanked Suzuka for stepping in. After she bounced to grab her place in line, Marin had Amane run through a bunch of poses and went absolutely wild, snapping photos of him. Once she was done, the random strangers in line all got their shots in, and before long, it was finally Suzuka's moment to capture Amane. After knocking out a few shots, she wrapped it up and thanked Amane for letting her immortalize his beauty through her lens. Once the thank yous between him and Suzuka were out of the way, Amane turned to Marin and asked if Gojo had come to the event with her. Marin confirmed that he had, and then broke it down that he wasn't by her side because he was linking with some cosplayer. Catching that, Suzuka chimed in that she'd rolled up with her crew too, and mentioned that one of them was meeting up with somebody who was into her props. Right then, Akira hit Gojo with a text, letting him know she was heading over. and the dude got hyped at the thought of finally meeting his new idol. But his jaw dropped when he realized Akira was actually a girl. She was equally caught off guard to find out Gojo was a dude, since she'd been totally convinced he was a girl. On the flip side, Suzuka brought her cosplayer homie Miyako over to meet Marin and Amane, and Marin's jaw hit the floor when she saw how flawlessly Miyako was rocking her character's look. Miyako was low-key amazed that Marin actually clocked her character, considering it came from a vintage manga, and Marin let her know she'd already read through it. After the group vibed for a bit, Marin asked Miyako if she could shoot some pictures of her, and Miyako was totally down. Once Marin wrapped up her session, Suzuka stepped in to take over, and Marin looked genuinely confused when she spotted Suzuka crouching down to snap a shot. Suzuka patiently broke it down and showed her how shooting from varied angles could seriously level up the final result, and Marin was completely blown away. She glanced back at her own shot of Miyako and told Suzuka she was ready to experiment with different angles herself. Right at that moment, Miyako piped up and asked if she and Amane had anything going on later, since they were throwing an after party and she wanted them to pull up. Cutting back to Gojo, he gave Akira a genuine apology for assuming she was a guy, and Akira returned the favor by apologizing for thinking he was a girl. With the whole mix-up over their names and assumptions squashed, they finally got into the real conversation about what had drawn them to each other. Gojo whipped out his phone, and while pulling up the pic she'd posted gripping a katana, he asked what manga or franchise her character belonged to. Akira explained that it was actually her own original character, and Gojo's respect for her instantly skyrocketed. The second he started gassing her up, she shut it down fast, saying her character was nothing special and had been overdone way too many times. Naturally, Gojo wasn't having it and pushed back, telling her he slid into her DMs specifically because her character had genuinely caught his attention. When Akira went quiet, he started spiraling and rushed to apologize for going too far, but she just cracked up and told him she appreciated it. She then let him know she was fully prepared to walk him through all his prop questions, so Gojo pulled up the list he typed out on his phone and got started. Right on cue, Marin hit him up with a call, sparing Akira from having to sit through his entire monologue. When he picked up, Marin immediately asked for his location because she was trying to head his way. Since Akira was right there, he quickly checked if she was cool with Marin linking up with them, and once she gave the green light, he passed Marin their location. Marin let him know she was nearby and proceeded to holler at him from up on the wall right behind where they were sitting. The second Akira laid eyes on her, she freaked out internally and started ducking her face the moment Marin came down to link with Gojo. Marin enthusiastically filled Gojo in on how Suzuka and her homie had invited them all to a party, and when she eventually let him get a word in, he went ahead and introduced her to Akira. Predictably, she had absolutely no idea that Akira was doing everything in her power to avoid making eye contact with her. Right then, Suzuka rolled up and was caught off guard to spot Akira posted there. As it turned out, Akira was the second friend Suzuka had referenced to Marin, and she'd also been under the impression that Gojo was female. Since it was Suzuka's first time actually meeting Gojo, Marin did the formal introductions, and Suzuka internally noted that he was quite the catch. But she snapped herself out of it fast and shot Miyako a text, declaring that there was a full-blown emergency. Eventually, the whole crew headed over to the after-party, and Marin wasted no time pulling up the photos she'd taken to show Gojo. While that was going down, Amane clocked that Akira seemed noticeably uneasy and couldn't figure out the reason. Once the food hit the table, Miyako asked Akira to slide her bag over, and after she did, Miyako reached in and pulled out a tiny doll. The second Gojo saw the doll, his mind jumped to his own Hina doll, and he felt a wave of comfort knowing he wasn't alone in his doll fixation. While Miyako was going on about her beloved doll, a text came through from Aoi, one of the others in their friend group. Aoi hit her up saying she wasn't going to be able to make it to their weekend cosplay session, and when she passed the news to Suzuka, Suzuka said they'd just have to push through with the three of them. That got Marin's attention, so she jumped in and asked what cosplay they were planning to pull off. Suzuka revealed they were going with a coffin cosplay, and since Gojo was completely lost, Marin jumped in to explain that it was from a horror game featuring 6 nuns. Amane then threw himself into the mix and asked if he could be their fourth, and Miyako was more than happy to welcome him. But the moment he floated the idea of Marin joining too, all three of them went completely stiff with shock. Marin bashfully let them know she was out because she was currently watching what she ate, so Amane threw out the idea of her grabbing a ready-made costume rather than waiting on Gojo to craft her one. Marin wasn't fully sold on the idea, but the second Gojo gave it his stamp of approval. She was all in without hesitation, which clearly rubbed Akira the wrong way. Marin then asked if she could bring along another cosplayer to fill the slot, and Suzuka was totally on board. Marin enthusiastically started dialing the mystery guest, but it only took Gojo a second to clock that it was Sajuna, and he immediately started spiraling. Sajuna wasn't exactly thrilled when Marin's call came through, and the moment Marin laid out her reasoning, she shut it down and dropped the call right away. Right at that moment, Shinju came over and wanted to know who she'd just been on the phone with. Sajuna let her know it had been Marin. The second she brought up that Marin had invited her to pull off a coffin cosplay, Shinju absolutely lit up. The girl was a hardcore horror fanatic who was dying to see her favorite characters brought to life. Sadly, that excitement didn't last long, because Sajuna dropped the news that she'd already rejected Marin's offer. Watching her little sister spiral into sadness over her decision, Sajuna had no option but to swallow her pride and ring Marin back to take her up on it. After that, both sisters linked up with Marin and the rest of the crew at the get-together. Suzuka and Miyako completely lost it over the forever fuming little gremlin because they were massive fans of her cosplay work. Marin was just as hyped to have everyone around, and Shinju wasn't even trying to contain her excitement either. Amane, though, was way more focused on figuring out where Sajuna did her shopping, since her whole vibe radiated effortless goth energy, and he was totally into it. He pulled up a photo to back himself up, so Sajuna went ahead and listed all the spots she regularly hit up. Right then, Marin excused herself to use the bathroom, and the second she stepped out, Amane clocked that Akira let out a visible sigh of relief, though he kept that observation to himself. Miyako, who'd been hunting down Sajuna's social media profile, nearly lost her mind when she discovered that the tiny Coca-Cola bottle was sitting on over 200,000 followers. She acknowledged that Sajuna's cosplays had absolutely earned every bit of clout they'd gotten, and Akira jumped in to ask whether Sajuna had hired a professional photographer. Sajuna said she hadn't, which caught them all off guard, since every single one of her shots looked like it came straight out of a studio. Akira studied the photos closely, pointing out that whoever was behind the lens clearly had a deep love and appreciation for Sajuna. Right at that moment, everyone clocked that Shinju's head was practically steaming off her shoulders, and they instantly figured she was the one snapping all her sister's photos. Sajuna backed it up, which only sent Shinju deeper into her shy spiral, so Miyako swooped in and asked if she'd want to join their cosplay the following weekend. Shinju absolutely spiraled after hearing that, because not only did she not cosplay at all, but the character Miyako was pushing on her happened to be the game's main protagonist. Marin came back right at that moment and was fully on board with Shinju jumping into their cosplay group. Shinju tried to back out and suggested Gojo take the slot instead, but Gojo shut it down, saying that kind of thing just wasn't his scene. Eventually, Miyako managed to talk Shinju into going along with it and then went around assigning everyone their character. Gojo asked if there was a role for him, and Miyako told him he could pitch in by crafting the props they'd need. The moment she mentioned which scene they'd be recreating, Shinju beamed with excitement, while Sajuna looked like she was 2 seconds away from losing her lunch. Marin offered to let Gojo borrow her game, so he could run through it and get familiar with the props they'd be working with. She estimated it'd clock in at around 7 hours to complete, and while Gojo was far from thrilled about that, he was relieved that the next day happened to be Sunday. Suzuka then let Gojo know she'd love to get his take on the game once he wrapped it up, and he assured her he'd come back with a solid review. The second Shinju joined the conversation, Sajuna shot up from her seat and announced she was heading to the bathroom. As she made her exit, Akira rose and said she was stepping out for a smoke, so Amane tagged along. Gojo took off as well, though his destination was the men's restroom. Once everyone had cleared out, Marin casually dropped to Shinju that she'd cosplayed as Rei at her school festival, but the ones who actually lost it over the news were Miyako and Suzuka. They begged her to pull up a photo, but Marin let them down gently, explaining she hadn't snapped any pictures that day. She twisted the knife even further when she revealed that the outfit she'd worn was from the bento scene. Meanwhile, Akira and Amane were over in the smoking area, getting a feel for each other. When Akira noticed that Amane wasn't actually lighting up, she called him out on it, and he came clean that he wasn't a smoker. He explained that he trailed her out there because he wanted to bring up Marin, someone he'd clocked that she clearly had a problem with. Right then, he spotted Gojo lurking in the doorway, so Gojo quickly owned up to having overheard their conversation. Akira stamped out her cigarette and made it plain that she had zero interest in being around Marin or exchanging a single word with her. Later, Gojo tagged along to Marin's place so he could dive into the coffin game, and after a while, she nudged him that he'd need to start heading out soon. Gojo said he could actually stick around longer and filled her in that his grandpa was crashing at his aunt's place since he had an early chiropractor appointment. That little piece of news got Marin hyped, and out of nowhere, she turned to Gojo and asked if he'd want to just spend the night, completely catching him off guard. His stunned reaction cracked her up, so she walked it back and said she was only playing, and Gojo got back to the game. About an hour later, he hit save on his progress, and Marin slipped into the nun's costume she'd picked up after the party. Gojo said the outfit just needed a quick ironing, but when he caught a look at her wig, he pointed out that the fringe was way too long and would need to be restyled. With all that handled, he let her know it was time for him to make his way back home. Marin was not ready for him to bounce, and the universe had her back when he pulled out the train schedule. It turned out service had been completely suspended because of an accident. Marin brought up the overnight invite again, except this time she was being dead serious. Gojo turned into a complete stammering mess the second he processed what she'd said, and started scrambling to cook up reasons why staying over just wasn't an option. Marin reminded him that anything he needed could be grabbed at the nearby convenience store and pushed him to reconsider, since nobody had any idea when the trains would be running again. Gojo went completely still for a few moments, running everything through his head, and even though he was absolutely terrified at the thought of spending the night alone with Marin, he had to admit it was probably his best move. Later, at the store, Marin headed off to grab some food, while Gojo wandered the aisles looking for anything he might need. When he stumbled across some energy drinks, it hit him that he could knock them back and power through the whole night without sleeping. He was still zoned in on what he thought was his lifeline when Marin tracked him down, but the girl was fully convinced he was standing in that aisle for a box of condoms. When she asked if he was actually serious about buying it, the oblivious dude confirmed that he was, since sleeping was definitely not on tonight's agenda. As he strolled off, Marin stayed completely rooted to the spot, dead certain that the two of them were about to spend the entire night playing tag. After they returned to her place, Marin took a shower and put on matching plot covers in anticipation of what she thought was to come. When she went to the living room, she shyly told Gojo that the bathroom was all his, so he thanked her and left. Alone again, her nerves kept climbing, and she began wondering why he suddenly wanted to crack her. At that moment, she recalled the day she teased him about carrying protection and panicked because that boldness was nowhere to be found. When Gojo returned later, he went back to his spot on the floor to continue playing the video game. Thanks to the thoughts running around her head, Marin couldn't sit still, so she fell off the couch and hit her head on the floor. Gojo quickly rushed to check if she was feeling okay, but the overwhelmed girl wouldn't let him touch her. She then told him she needed time to calm down and asked him to wait until she had eaten something. A little while later, the two sat eating cup noodles, and Marin admitted that now that she had some food in her stomach, she wasn't as nervous as before. Gojo couldn't understand why she was anxious, and he didn't pry. Instead, he asked if eating noodles at that time wouldn't affect her dieting. Marin assured him it wouldn't, since the noodles were low in calories, so he dropped the issue. As they kept eating, Marin brought up that her dad used to always cook noodles late at night while he watched movies. He tried to sneak around her, but she always caught him and went to war with him over the food. She said the food always hit different because she'd had to fight him for it. Once she was done eating, she told Gojo she was dying for something fried, but thanks to her diet, it was completely off the table. When Gojo stood up to clean the table, he noticed Marin had dozed off, so he carried her to her room and headed back to the living room to keep gaming. He cracked open an energy drink to stay awake, but paused when he noticed the on-screen dialogue was giving him weird vibes. Assuming he'd picked the wrong choice, he went to reload the last checkpoint, but all that greeted him were the words, "I don't want to remember." Knowing there was no going back, he pressed on with the game, and that's exactly when he found out why this thing was labeled a horror game to begin with. The next morning, Marin opened her eyes, and the moment she clocked that she was by herself in her room, she lost it. She bolted straight to the living room to look for Gojo, And once she spotted the empty energy drink cans, it hit her that she'd been totally overthinking. She asked whether he'd pulled an all-nighter just to finish the game, and Gojo said nope, but wouldn't say anything beyond that. Thrown off by how he was acting, she asked if everything was okay, and he told her the game had seriously messed with his head. Feeling bad for the guy, she offered to whip him up something sweet for breakfast, but that just triggered flashbacks of the gruesome dinner scene, and his food started making its way back up. Later that night, he hit up Suzuka and Shinju to drop his review of the game, and while he looked traumatized for eternity, both girls were absolutely hyped. Turns out, Mira, the game's protagonist, was the one responsible for every single murder. But by the time the game wrapped up, he found out that Myra had been locked away in a mental institution, and the whole thing was in her head. The part where she devoured all her sisters had him genuinely nauseous, but Shinju and Suzuka were completely obsessed with that scene. Mira even went on about how gorgeous the end title screen was, and that's the moment Gojo clocked that this girl was kind of unhinged. After hanging up, Shinju went to check on Sajuna, and was caught off guard to find her already deep in work on her wig. Sajuna said it was the bare minimum she could do since Shinju had been handling all the communication with Suzuka and the others on her behalf. Touched by her sister's gesture, Shinju thanked Sajuna and asked if she could hang around and watch her style her wig. Back at home, Marin was absolutely suffocating in secondhand embarrassment over what she'd assumed the night before. She couldn't wrap her head around the fact that she'd hyped herself up for absolutely nothing and started debating whether to finally tell Gojo how she felt. She thought back to every time he'd panicked whenever she or someone else brought up them being a couple and assumed she was permanently stuck in the friend zone. She couldn't stop herself from imagining the moment she'd confess, and in her head, rather than saying yes or no, he just straight up ghosted her. That made-up scenario had her in actual tears, and she told herself there was no way she could handle him going MIA on her again. The following day, she rode the train home with Nawa after class, and Nawa immediately questioned why she was giving off such sad girl energy. Marin wasn't trying to put herself on blast, so she flipped it and asked Nawa what she'd do if a friend confessed to her. Noah said she'd reject them, and when Marin pressed for a reason, Noah hit back by asking if she'd seriously date the brain-dead Marita just because they were close. Taking the point, Marin said even Marita himself wouldn't want to go out with her. Later on, she showed up at Gojo's place for dinner, but he intercepted her in the hallway and told her to bounce, which threw her off completely. Catching her reaction, he rushed to explain that he'd made fried fish for dinner because she'd casually mentioned wanting something fried. But he'd figured it out too late that fried food for dinner was a big no-no for people on a diet, and didn't want to put her in an awkward position. Hitting her that he'd gone through all that effort just because she'd casually dropped a craving, Marin was genuinely touched and said she was eating it regardless. Gojo wasn't sold on the idea, but she declared that today was officially her cheat day. She went absolutely feral on her food during dinner, but suddenly fell silent when her anxieties started creeping back in. So when it came time to head out, she timidly asked Gojo to walk her to the train station. On the way there, she psyched herself up to confess, but bottled it at the very last second and instead asked if she could swing by for dinner tomorrow. Gojo said that was fine, and out of nowhere, she blurted out that she'd cover the cost of the groceries. He shot that down fast, saying she was already compensating him more than enough for sewing her costumes, so Marin dropped it. They eventually said their goodbyes, and the whole train ride back, she was going back and forth in her head about confessing. She was terrified that putting her feelings out there would wreck what they had, and that thought just dragged her mood down even further. When she stepped out of the station, some dudes rolled up trying to shoot their shot, but she was in zero mood to deal with riskless clowns, so she shut them down without mercy. As she walked away fuming, she got even more fired up and finally made up her mind to shoot her shot with Gojo. A few days later, Marin hit the shops with Shinju, and while they were grabbing what they needed, Shinju casually voiced her worries about how things were going back at the studio. For some backstory, earlier that day, when it was only her, Marin, Suzuka, and Miyako in the space, she'd admitted she was scared Sajuna would dip on them since she stuck exclusively to magical girl cosplays. Apparently, Sajuna had always wanted to branch out into different cosplays, but because she was on the shorter side of life, she never actually went for it. The girls reassured her that Sajuna wasn't going anywhere, but pointed out they'd first need to get her to believe she could pull off other cosplays. To pull that off, they cooked up a plan to lure her into scouting a location and then rope her into cosplaying a character she'd always looked up to. They were all certain it would be a pleasant shock, but snapping back to the present, Suzuka and Miyako quickly learned they were dead wrong when Sejuna went off on them for setting her up. When she tried to walk out, they bolted after her, and Miyako came out swinging by telling her she knew the real reason she was dodging the cosplay was that she was flatter than all the roads in Japan. That comment froze Sejuna right where she stood, but before she could even clap back, Miyako jumped in to let her know she already had a solution for that exact problem. Suzuka chimed in that it wouldn't hurt to give it a shot, and reminded her she'd probably kick herself later if she bounced. They followed that up with a genuine apology for overstepping, but honestly, what they'd said had already gotten under Sejuna's skin. She wanted to know how they'd clocked her deeper insecurities, and Suzuka hit her with the response that they were flat-chested comrades walking the same road. That landed, and Sejuna decided to stick around, though she made it crystal clear she'd be out the door if she wasn't feeling the final result. Over on the other side of things, Akira showed up at Gojo's spot so they could get started on the props. He let her know it'd just be the two of them, since his grandfather had headed out earlier in the day. Once they got to his room, she clocked the brushes he used for his Hina doll work and questioned why the bristles were so narrow. Gojo broke it down for her. They needed to be that fine in order to capture the doll's facial expressions accurately. While she was scanning the room, she caught sight of his Hina doll, gassed him up for his skill, and then told him they needed to stop admiring and start grinding. Cutting back to the studio, Suzuka handed Sejuna some silicone chest pads, and once she put them on, her situation went from grapes to full-on oranges real quick. Then she parked Sejuna in front of a mirror, and while working her hair into a wig cap, opened up about her own journey as a cosplayer. She explained that her all-time favorite character was some tall guy with insanely godly looks, and the very first time she tried to cosplay him, she was hit with just how much she was missing. She fell into a low place and nearly called it quits, but her obsession with the character refused to let her give up. The longer she kept at it, the better she got at finding tricks to match his look from every possible angle. Intrigued by this, Sejuna asked Miyako how many years she'd been in the cosplay game, and Miyako casually dropped that she'd been at it for a solid decade. She then promised to pass on everything she'd picked up across those 10 years as she started working on her makeup. Back at Gojo's, the two of them were deep into crafting some eyeballs, and Akira took a moment to praise what he was putting together. Gojo came clean that this was actually his first time building props, and reflecting on how he'd just been buying all of Marin's stuff, he said he wished he'd been the one making them all along. Akira pointed out that nothing was stopping him from doing exactly that from now on, and just the thought of it had him buzzing with excitement. They eventually wrapped up what they were building, and during their break, Gojo turned around and asked Akira how long she'd been in the prop-making scene. She told him it was actually pretty new for her. It only started after she linked up with Suzuka and Miyako, who pulled her into their cosplay circle. Gojo got curious and asked if he could peek at some photos from their group shoots, so she pulled up the one where she was rocking the President Luna costume. Gojo was genuinely shocked to find out that had been her, so she went ahead and showed him a couple more. When she came out and said she wasn't actually a cosplay girly, he couldn't help but ask why she kept saying yes to everything Suzuka and Miyako threw at her. Akira flashed back to the day she'd slipped into a store to grab a mystery box for a series and had been caught in the act by those two. At first, she'd braced herself to get clowned on for being into something like that, but she was caught off guard when they turned around and said they were into it too. After that, the three of them clicked, and Akira realized she genuinely couldn't say no to whatever those two asked of her. Switching back to the studio, Shinju and Marin walked in to find Sejuna absolutely stunning in her full costume. Shinju sprinted over to gush over her sister's appearance, and that was all it took for Sejuna to ease up and finally own the fact that she was eating this cosplay. Meanwhile, Marin was planted at the entrance, full-on sobbing happy tears, because that girl was the biggest drama queen with absolutely zero chill. Once it was time for the photo session, Miyako did a solid job of guiding Shinju on which angles to shoot from. Every single shot came out fire, and Miyako was low-key proud of herself, even if she found it a bit unsettling that all three of them were snapping away at Sejuna simultaneously. Once the shoot wrapped, Marin and Shinju switched into male character cosplays, and as they drifted off to shoot their own photos, Sejuna pulled Suzuka and Miyako aside to thank them. She also came clean that, up until that day, she'd genuinely been thinking about hanging up the cosplay life because she felt like she was aging out of it. The girls were caught off guard by that confession and fired back that they personally knew grown adults well into their middle years who were still deep in the cosplay world. They pushed her to keep chasing the things that brought her joy, pointing out that having fun doesn't come with an expiry date. Suzuka even threw in a joke that adulting actually made cosplaying better since you could just throw money at whatever you needed. The catch, of course, was that every last coin somehow ended up going straight to cosplay, and Miyako co-signed that hard, saying she constantly blocked out just how much it drained your wallet. Sejuna cracked up at that, and before long, the rest of the girls were losing it right along with her. Back at Gojo's crib, he told Akira they were cut from the same cloth because he was going to go all out to make every single one of Marin's wishes happen. Later, Marin and the crew sat down for some takoyaki, and mid-meal, Shinju excused herself to take a call from her mom. That's when Marin brought up Akira, sending Suzuka and Miyako into full panic mode as they started tripping over their words. But to their shock, Marin revealed she was already aware Akira wasn't feeling her, because when she came back from the bathroom that one time, she caught how Akira was chatting freely with everyone. Despite having been dead silent the whole time Marin had been around, Suzuka and Miyako scrambled to put together some kind of excuse, but they completely fumbled and couldn't get a single word out right. Sejuna was the one who stepped in, dropping the truth that you simply can't force or control how one person feels toward another. Marin nodded in agreement, and the rest of them offered up apologies because the whole thing genuinely had them feeling terrible. The following morning, as Marin was prepping for the cosplay photo shoot, she made a personal vow to come clean to Gojo before the day was over. She attempted to rehearse using her stuffed toy, but kept cracking up at how ridiculous she came across. Right at that moment, Gojo buzzed the doorbell, so she headed over to answer it, then went dead silent the second they were both sitting in her bedroom. Because he had to apply her makeup, he cupped her chin and tilted her face toward his, which only sent her nerves into overdrive. Once they pulled up to the studio, Suzuka greeted them at the door, and Gojo was blown away by the completely black set. Suzuka mentioned that she had personally asked for this look over a lit-up church backdrop, since the dark setting would naturally keep all eyes on the cast. While Marin was busy gushing over the gold goblets on the table, Gojo sidled up right next to her, sending her into full panic mode as she bolted straight to the dressing room. Suzuka had no idea what that was about, but shrugged it off and shifted her attention over to Amon. To her shock, the guy was mid-undress already, so she scrambled to shield her eyes. Amane said sorry for the lack of warning and clarified that he was totally accustomed to changing alongside his sister. Predictably, the naughty lady waved him on to continue, which had Amani low-key questioning her character. Back in the changing room, Marine noticed Sejuna and Shinju had already suited up in their outfits. While she was hyping them up, Miyako burst out of the room she'd been dressing in and announced it was time to strap down Shinju's assets. As that went down, Marin observed the whole thing and flashed back to what went sideways the last time Shinju put on a cosplay. She then swore to herself she'd stay vigilant for whenever her girls tried to stage another escape attempt. Before long, the shoot kicked off, and every single shot turned out stunning, exactly the way Suzuka had predicted. Prior to setting up for the dinner scene, Marin and Amane requested a peek at the shots, while everyone else stayed put. Once the moment arrived, Suzuka and Gojo started loading the plates with fake blood and various props, but Sejuna forced herself to look literally anywhere else. She was zoning out so intensely that Marin thought she was being mean-mugged and called her out on it. A ticked-off Sejuna snapped that she wasn't even looking at her, and right as she told her to stay in her lane, the prop cake got wheeled in. The sight of that cake sent Sejuna's stress through the roof, given that she chickened out before completing the game and had zero clue how things wrapped up. Right at that second, Gojo splattered the leftover prop blood all over the cake, drowning the whole table in crimson stains. Caught up in the chaos, Sejuna glanced down at her plate, and the sight of it put up a buried memory. That evening, she had been tidying up after supper when her mom casually dropped that she'd snuck blended veggies into the food. Sejuna had been absolutely disgusted since she hated vegetables, and her own mom had straight up deceived her into consuming them. Snapping back to reality, Sejuna continued gawking at her blood-soaked plate as though she'd stumbled onto an actual crime scene. After a while, they wrapped up what was left of the shoot. Once it was done, Shinju gushed to the group that it felt like she'd actually been living inside the game. She expressed her gratitude for letting her step into Mira's role, despite the fact that Mira made the Joker look well-adjusted. While the group was chatting about tearing down the set, Gojo clocked that Sejuna had gone MIA and headed off to track her down. Once he found her, he admitted he figured she'd bail entirely, given her total hatred for anything horror-related. Sejuna said she only showed up for Shinju's sake, but then accidentally revealed that she'd actually had a good time with the group. Mid-rant about how she'd flopped as a tsundere, she abruptly blacked out from the earlier stress, sending Gojo into a full-on screaming spiral. Without a moment's hesitation, Suzuka, Miyako, and Amane came sprinting over to her side. Back on the other side, Marin was in the dressing room assisting Shinju with undoing her chest wrapping. Once they were done, Shinju slipped out to grab something and bumped straight into Akira in the hallway, who then helped sort out her collar. While she was watching the older girl, it hit Shinju out of nowhere that they never got a shot with just Akira and Marin together. Marin stepped out of the dressing room right at that moment, so Shinju begged her to hold on while she ran to grab a camera for their shot. Turns out, she was obsessed with the scenes where their characters clashed and was desperate to capture the two of them in a frame. As she darted back into the dressing room, Marin shouted for her to hold it and said there was no way Akira would want a photo with someone she couldn't even tolerate. Akira and Shinju were both blindsided by what she said, and it triggered Akira's memory of the talk she'd had with Amane and Gojo not long ago. The reason she told them she wanted nothing to do with Marin was that she genuinely had no idea how she'd hold herself together around her. Turns out, the moment Suzuka put Marin's photo in front of her, she had instantly become her biggest stan. All that distant, icy behavior had been a total front, and she couldn't feel worse about it. She broke into tears not long after, and confessed to the guys that she had no clue how she'd managed to hold it together during the shoot. Cutting back to now, Gojo and the crew heard Akira let out a shriek, so they came charging out and broke the news to Marin that Akira was literally her #1 fan. The second she heard that, Marin screamed with excitement and sprinted toward Akira, declaring she'd never had an actual fangirl in her life. She then called on Shinju to snap their photo, and Akira just stood there frozen, unable to process how unreal her luck was. The surprise photo session wrapped up with another Akira meltdown, and shortly after, as Shinju was talking her down, the others said sorry to Marin for keeping her in the dark. Marin told them she held no grudge, and noted that the whole situation was a solid lesson in why being upfront with people saves everyone from unnecessary drama. She then mentioned wanting to go thank Akira once more for having her back, but Suzuka and Miyako practically got on their knees, begging her to leave it alone. After everything, the crew headed out of the studio, though Akira needed to basically be dragged along by her friends since she was still a wreck from her fangirl breakdown. Eventually, everyone split off, leaving Marine and Gojo by themselves. On the train home, she kept psyching herself up to tell him how she felt, but her nerves had her completely locked up. Once they stepped off the train, Gojo suggested he'd walk her back to her place, and her tiny inner self popped up to cheer her on. But even with that little boost, Marin stayed completely silent the entire walk back to her building. Even once they got there, she was still way too chicken to say a single word or so much as meet his gaze. Gojo attempted to check in on her, but the sight of the sunset completely pulled his attention away. While they both gazed at it, he opened up to Marin that working on props had made him realize he wanted to keep making things alongside her and for her. The resolve in his expression sent Marin spiraling into a montage of all their best memories, and even after that, she still couldn't push the words out. But the moment he turned to leave, she snatched his shirt and shakily asked if he wanted to snap a selfie together. Gojo agreed, and the hyped-up girl launched herself onto him out of nowhere and clicked the shot. The whole situation had him flushing red, so he attempted to set her back down, but ended up knocking her phone clean out of her grip. Will Brother Wakana continue to be friend-zoned by Marin, or will she confess her feelings? Comment cosplay if you watch this recap to the end. And if you enjoy anime recaps like this, subscribe to the channel and watch this next video.